Alright, hey everybody, I'm Angormus. I'm one of the top speedrunners from Path of Exile 2. I'm here with CrimsonCasts. He's also one of the other top runners for Path of Exile 2, and he's participated in a lot of the races.
And just to give you guys some context, so Angormus doesn't have to brag about himself, in Path of Exile 2, the main activity for the speedrun community is actually officially developer-hosted races. Every major patch, every few months, we have a cycle of 3 races, and Angormus has won all 6 of the races that have occurred so far. With another race cycle happening over the next couple of weeks, it looks like Angormus will remain at or close to the #1 ranked runner in the game with very consistent times and always playing Warrior. An important thing to note for the GDQ Games Committee is that the speedrun.com leaderboards for this game, while they do exist and are populated, the thing that the speedrun community in this game cares about is real-time attack races, the ones that are developer hosted, as well as a few other community events, which attract hundreds and hundreds of participants. So if you look at SRC, you'll get a wrong impression that this is not a very popular speed game, when in fact the major ladders, as Angormus is showing you now, have many hundreds of competitors participating on a casual basis, and at least a few dozen that grind the game as a speedrun activity as their primary stream activity or as their primary way of playing the game. So this has a much larger speedrun community than you would understand from looking at SRC specifically, like you might for other games.
Alright, and so to start off, at the start of every run, we do a migration just to ensure that we get a fresh start. Delete a character.
So what that does is it deletes all gold, all items, all currency from the environment which we'll be running. So this is the equivalent of a completely fresh new game character. And Angormus is going to be running Warrior for us today.
Every time we start off a run, we get off the Executioner's block, and we end up in the riverbank, lying down. Start of every run, I start moving my wisdom scrolls around, with my default stuff, and the run starts the second we start moving once we're standing.
And just to explain the game category here while Angormus does his initial setup, so far, while the game is in early access, there are 4 major acts, and the one that we'll be running today is to kill the final boss of Act 4. Our expected completion time is between 2 hours 35 minutes and 2 hours 45 minutes. One thing that I want to qualify, if you're familiar with Path of Exile and other games like it, is that there is a fair amount of RNG associated with map layouts, and we'll be talking about how Angormus and other speedrunners in Path of Exile sight read these maps. But there is a very consistent amount of time. The amount of variation due to map layouts is in the mid-single-digit minutes at most, so you don't need to worry about GDQ getting off to an awkward schedule. And then one thing that Angormus is doing right now, you may notice he's resetting at that checkpoint over and over. The thing that he's doing there is farming a few items that are called skill gems. Those give him the ability to do a skill called Rolling Slam. I'll explain more about the skill gem system as we get deeper into the run, but the reason that he was resetting there over and over was to get a couple of those. Each one of them sells for 29 gold, and that gives him a better chance of being able to buy items from the early game shop. And then here he's completing the tutorial area boss called the Bloated Miller.
Every time you fight this boss as Warrior, the main goal is to get positioned right into this corner against the wall, so all his minions that he summons, I'm able to cleave them down with my AoE Mace Strike attack without losing any time. And then these zombies don't give any experience, I'm just clearing them to make sure I don't have any trouble.
And then we're going to get our first view here of one of the most iconic features of Path of Exile 2, the passive point tree, which contains around 1,500 total nodes. Don't worry, we're just going to be staying in one little quadrant today focused on warrior passives, but you can get a sense of just how much complexity is in the game from that quick snapshot there. And then he sells those early skill gems, buys a 2-handed mace, and is going to look for some early armor here as well, using the gold that he got from farming those skill gems earlier. A little bit of a lackluster option here, and then he's going to buy some scrolls so he can identify any items he finds in the wild, and we're going to be out into the Clearfell, which is our first zone of the game.
Currently, oh, I found the Bira right away.
Yeah, so there are, like I said, there's procedural generation involved in the way that maps are generated in this game, and there are a couple of possible seeds. Based on knowing the orientation of the entrance to the Clearfell, Bira can spawn in a couple of different locations, but it happens that we got one of the shorter possible ones here. And we're going to kill Bira. She's going to give us a plus 10% permanent cold resistance, as well as a chance at a good two-handed mace. We got an upgrade there. That's nice. And then we consume that item that she drops, and that gives us some additional cold resistance, and we're into the Grellwood.
This is one of the most fun layouts to learn in the game. There's 16 different layouts that can all be rotated from a different starting direction, and then they can all also be mirrored on top of that. And this one I got the far spawn for the Witch's Hut.
As people learn the speedrun routing in the game, they tend to progress from generally trying to go fast to eventually learning sort of heuristics that can guide you through different zones. This zone is a big square area with points of interest that are most commonly toward the corners of the zone. And as you get to be a more and more advanced runner, you'll eventually be memorizing table bases for all of the possible layouts. Like Angormus said, this one has, I believe it's 16 possible, up to the level of reflections and rotations of the RNG seeds. But just working on those basic heuristics, you can get pretty close to top times, within maybe 10 or 15 minutes of what the best runners are able to do with memorization. Then you just saw him kill that witch there, and that witch drops him a support gem. Support gems give you the opportunity to modify the utility of your skills. So one thing that you're going to notice right now is Angormus is using a skill called Rolling Slam, where he throws his mace overhead and smashes down onto the enemies. And that primes them for stun, and that's what the little pearly yellow orbs are on people's foreheads. Once he primes them for stun, he can then use Bone Shatter, and the support gem that he used essentially causes that Bone Shatter to echo, and that will give him effectively double damage on those Bone Shatters. So when he's interested in taking experience, what he'll be doing is kiting together big mobs of weak enemies, and then smashing them to stun them, and then Bone Shattering them to cause an echoing aftershock that takes out the whole mob.
In this zone, there's only 8 different layouts, and it's considered a completely solved zone. This is a closed bow tie layout, so there's a obelisk here that's not always in the same location. In this case, this is the one that can move around.
Yeah, so what... Sorry.
No, you're good.
Go ahead. So to explain what it means while Angormus clears out this mob and manages his HP, if you look at the entrance orientation to this map, which Angormus can show us again in a second, there is a little bit of a sort of W shape on the wall next to the entrance here. People call that the bow tie, and that allows him to know where these little mini objectives are in the middle of the zone. And as a consequence, he can then path more efficiently through this zone without ever having seen it before. That W shape is currently on the top right of your screen. If you look at it there, you can see that sort of open mouth shape. We call that the bow tie, and that bow tie shape there gives information about where the rest of the obelisks in this zone will be. And then you can see as he's progressing through the zone here, he can smash down onto the enemies with that rolling slam that creates that yellowy orb on people's foreheads, and then from there he's able to Bone Shatter onto the rest of them, sign a few skill points, and continue progressing through these different objectives.
Who is that?
One of the things we need to do in this zone, as a side objective in the current game, is this abyss right here. And once I clear it, or any abyss early on, there's a support gem reward for successfully clearing one. And it's just quite a dangerous affair early on. So I want to make sure I'm level 4, so I have my next upgrade of Flask that I got from the Witch's Hut.
Yeah, so if you look in the bottom left of Angormus' screen here, you'll see that there is a red and a blue flask which give life and mana. If you've played essentially any other ARPG, this will be a familiar system to you. And as he levels up, he's going to get higher and higher tiers of those items. Then he's just fishing for a little bit of armor on gloves to be able to make sure that he can get a little bit more survivable. There are 3 fundamental types of defenses In Path of Exile 2, the most important one to understand for the warrior is armor, which essentially does a good job at mitigating small hits and a bad job at mitigating large ones. Since most of the stuff that's threatening to you at low levels during the campaign is pretty aptly described as a lot of small hits from these large mob sizes, you can outskill the bosses by dodging their slams, and you can use your armor to mitigate the damage from these larger but weaker mobs. And then now Angormus is completing the Rust King. He's on pretty good pace. We're around 8 minutes in, and that's a pretty good opportunity here. Then the other thing that you'll notice is these sort of blue face-shaped orbs in his inventory. Those are currency that allow him to upgrade his items. We're going to gloss over the crafting system in this game. It gets really deep, especially in the end game. But the main thing that you want to have some knowledge of is just there are a couple of key currencies that allow him to upgrade his items. And as he finds those, he's going to be spending them both offensively and defensively to get more armor, max life, elemental resistances, as well as things like attack speed and bonus damage on his weapon.
It's fine work, Father. I still have much to learn.
Stick to the terms.
And then you'll notice he's switching back and forth between these two different maces. Early on in the game, the warrior actually does so much damage that combination of slamming the mob and then shattering the mob to cause that aftershock, sometimes you end up with too much damage to actually prime for that stun, and that means that you can't get the larger area of effect shatter off, which is how you're accumulating most of your XP. So you actually deliberately keep a weaker mace in inventory in order to be able to make sure that your first hit doesn't kill the mob, it just primes it for the second hit, which causes that large aftershock.
Una sings a wonderful song here. We will hear none of it because we reset at checkpoint to skip the animation for it.
That will be done many times throughout the run where there will be plot or dialogue that we'll be doing, and we will skip that by resetting at checkpoint. We'll also be using resetting at checkpoint and checkpoint hopping to navigate a few of the zones that we'll be encountering, so you can expect us to be jumping across the map in quite a few different places, and we'll be explaining that as it comes on. The other thing that I want to point out is that as Angormus is navigating this area, you'll see a couple of things happening. One is he will dodge roll and then immediately keep moving. That activates a movement technology called sprinting. But while you're sprinting, you have a very, very low stun threshold, and it's very easy to get knocked down. This is a deliberately designed risk-reward mechanic in the game. And as speedrunners, you end up in a situation where you get knocked down when you're not wearing armor or when you're very underleveled, as we will be for most of the run. Getting knocked down is almost certainly a death sentence. You'll see Angormus doing various things when he does get knocked down in order to mitigate things. The other thing that you'll notice is that when he's not in a dangerous situation, as he currently is, Angormus will be taking off his chest piece. That is because chest pieces, armor bases, provide minus 5% movement speed. And so when we're feeling safe, when we're in an area that isn't very dangerous, which will vary from zone to zone and mob to mob, you take off that chest piece, you move 5% faster. We're speedrunners, we want to move 5% faster.
This zone has a bunch of dangerous mob types, mainly these rattlers with their ranged poison attack. Quite hard to navigate the small corridors. Just looking for the boss exit arena here. Ended up with the boss. Exit arena is probably down there.
So then now you can see Angormus is going to fight yet another mini-boss here. This is the Rotten Druid. You're going to get a little bit more of our skill technology here coming through. We're going to kill this guy. He also drops a guaranteed support gem, which will allow us to ramp up our build much more quickly and consistently. These guaranteed rewards add a lot of consistency to the run. And then you can see Angormus will just barely not be able to get off that last stun, and he will drop a Regal Orb, which is an important crafting currency for us. It upgrades an item from having 2 modifiers to 3. This is the transition between magic items, which are blue, and rare items, which are yellow. And then now we're into Cemetery of the Eternals in 12 minutes, which is a little bit slower than maybe a world record run, but pretty good for marathon safe strategies.
Alright, Iron Ring? Oh,
Hopefully.
no such luck. Alright, we're doing a bit of level manipulation here of the zones. If we enter Mausoleum of the Praetor first, we can come back. The next zone that we enter, that's a side area from here, with one of the bosses that we need to get a quest item from to progress the story. They drop 2 different keys each. If we enter that one first, the Tomb of Asinia will be a level 9 zone, and capable of dropping level 11 weapons, which is an important breakdown level for our next mace upgrade. And without that, we'd only have one opportunity from the bosses to get a level 11 weapon, a Forge Maul.
Yeah, so to expand on that a little bit, we're going to be using primarily Slam and Shatter for mobs in the first half of the run, with a skill called Perfect Strike for bosses. And then halfway through the run, we're going to be transitioning to a different skill called Shield Wall. In Path of Exile 2, two-handed mace bases for the warrior class come in tiers. Those tiers result in big upgrades in the amount of damage per second that you can do for those Slam, Shatter, Strike skills that we care about. And those bases come at levels 1, 4, 11, 16, 22, and 28. And by the time that we get to 28, we'll have transitioned away from using maces for our primary damage. What that means is, like Angormus said, you want to be fighting bosses at level 9 as early as possible, because that level 11 mace breakpoint is super important to our DPS. So he manipulates the zone levels to have more chances to get that higher tier mace earlier.
You know, this area is level 9. When you enter the first tomb area, if you don't make a new zone on the other one, you end up with a level 8 and a level 9 zone. This was done successfully.
And then you can see here's this mini boss. You can see this sort of thicker, chonkier guy with his shield here, Marrow Walker, who does periodic fire explosions and stuns. The modifiers on these little rare monsters, the ones with yellow text in their name, are procedurally generated. They're chosen from a random table. Some of them are more threatening than others. Some of them are harder to deal with. And then you can see, for example, those chest pieces, one of them was yellow and had more modifiers. As we go through here, we're just going to be farming efficient experience. There are a number of different things that we can do, and Angormus is also sight reading this map. As you can see, we entered from the very top left there in the Cemetery of the Eternals, and as we progress through, he's using context clues to determine where the mini-boss in this zone is likely to be. This is one of the zones that has sort of a mixed understanding in the community. There is a table base available, but very few of the top runners are completely 100% comfortable using that table base, because the micro variations that can happen on each of those frameworks are really significant in affecting the zone. So people use different pathfinding strategies in here, and it's a zone where you can really see an opportunity for some of that skill expression in sight reading the maps early on in the run.
And here's Asinia.
And here we found Asinia. We have 2 more skill points to assign. We get our first small notable node on our passive tree called Brutal. Brutal gives us plus 10 strength and a big chunk of melee damage. And you can see here we're going to be swapping some things around in our inventory as we get set up for Asinia. Asinia and her husband Draven are 2 of the first mini-bosses in the game. You can see that they'll actually be summoning each other during their fight, so at some points in this fight, when Asinia summons Draven, you'll see a specter of her husband come down like this, and so you'll need to manage the 2 bosses at once, knowing which attacks from each are more threatening. It's not too difficult on Warrior, where you have relatively high armor and base HP early on in the run, but it is interesting to note that you do need to manage multiple boss mechanics at the same time.
Since we made a Mausoleum of the Praetor zone already, when I go back there, I have to control click on the zone and create a new instance for this zone to also be a level 9.
So that first copy that he opened, like we've said multiple times, was level 8. Now this zone is one of the more interesting zones to sight read. There's a pretty good heuristic that you can use for this. You can see that he entered on the right side of the dungeon, and then there's going to be a sort of wheel or plus sign shaped tile that we're passing on our right now, and that allows us to determine the center of the dungeon. And that means that we can find the boss arena. In around 70% of cases, the boss arena is on the exact opposite side of the dungeon. So you can see our entrance on the far right. That tile in the middle allows us to determine where the center of the dungeon is, and then we can use that context clue to help us find the boss arena at the end. And then now we're fighting Draven, and when Draven summons Asinia, that is much more dangerous for us than when Asinia summons Draven. Her AoE attack is very, very important to dodge here. So you'll see she summons these large sigils on the ground, and we're going to just dodge roll out of them. And then one thing that I want to point out here is that compared to other similar games in the genre, including Path of Exile 1 and its various rivals from other production companies, Path of Exile 2 has a sort of unique combat ethos designed around this sort of dodge roll and then punish the boss's recovery animation cycle. And so in some sense, there's some inspiration taken here from Souls-like games, and that's a pretty interesting change to the combat style that's sort of common to the core genre that Path of Exile 2 is an example of. Then we use the 2 keys from those mini-bosses to open that gate, and that allows us to fight Lachlan here, who is our bottleneck into the next zone in the game.
Second you click on the gate to his entrance, you want to reset at checkpoint, because there's about 30 seconds of dialogue that he goes through. It was one of the first major skips found in Act 1.
Hunt with the first ones, old man.
There are many differences between this game and something like a true Souls-like game. I just want to point out that that combat style comment was just about the dodge, punish, dodge cycle. It's pretty different. Obviously, we have this sort of top-down 2.5D animation style, and there are a lot of other focuses in this game. It's more action-driven. It has a lot less narrative plot than other games. Although there is certainly an RPG aspect, there is a narrative to the campaign that we're going through. One of the things that I want to point out here is that Angormus is also going to be choosing to take a very specific amount of experience as we progress through each of these zones. That starts to be important to manage around here. You'll notice if you look in the top right of his screen, Angormus is in a level 10 zone, and I believe he's currently level 8 and 99%. You want to stay within a few levels of the area level. If you're over-leveled, you get dramatically less experience pretty quickly as soon as you're one level over-leveled. But you can be a variable amount of levels under without suffering as significant a penalty. If you're within 3 levels early on in the game, you'll suffer no experience penalty. Angormus is now using these fissures in the ground called an abyss, where he knows that there will be good mob density, as well as a guaranteed reward from clearing the full abyss. So these sort of green highlighted monsters are good experience and give us an opportunity to get specific items that we may care about, as well as guaranteed rewards from clearing them as well.
In this case, the guaranteed reward is the Exalted Orb that just dropped. Everything else is a bonus. I saw the road earlier in this zone, and there's 2 ends to the road. One end is a dead end, and the other end is the exit to Farmlands. I'm just going to head up to Farmlands right now, and then checkpoint back down here to the boss arena in this zone. This boss over here is called the Crowbell, and he gives a 2 skill point reward for slaying him.
And not only are those 2 skill points as Angormus completes this boss here, they're also what are called weapon swap points. We're not going to be weapon swapping early on, but in Path of Exile you have the opportunity to use 2 different sets of weapons, which allows you to sort of bifurcate your skill tree, and that is going to be important for us much later on in the run when we want to make use of our very limited skill points to do different things for different skills.
And this boss is a 3-phase boss. He has 1 phase over at the Huntstone, and then before he grabs his bell. Now he has a different moveset with his bell. And after I slay the boss, I'm going to reset at checkpoint because it's faster than walking. After I loot, just check on back to Farmlands and exit.
You'll notice when items drop on the ground, they're highlighted with different colors and sounds. That's actually a customizable feature in the game. You can use a loot filter to highlight different things. That orange drop that we got is a unique item. It's not particularly valuable for us because of it being a specific unique that we care about, but it's worth a lot of gold when we sell it to vendors, and that will allow us to shop for things that we do care about. There are uniques that are very impactful to the run if they do occur. The chances of getting any specific unique that you care about in a given run are relatively low. As an example, in a previous patch, I completed about 700 runs, and the most important unique that could have happened for the build that we were all competing on in the last patch only dropped for me a total of 4 times in those 700 runs. But important nonetheless to grab all of those uniques just so you can make sure that you get your economy online, keep that gold going. And then you can see Angormus is starting to pile up currency on various different areas. In his inventory in the top left, you can see that we're accumulating different things. And now we've got our level 11 mace base. We use some crafting currency on it. We don't get what we want. And so Angormus, I imagine, is going to hold on to that and see if we can get a better opportunity in a second here.
Yeah, hopefully. Right now I'm only checking for a great life flask upgrade. I got it, a greater life flask. It's the most important upgrade I can get. Get some wisdom scrolls from down. Then I'm going to vendor everything at Renly here. Hope to get some movement speed boots.
That'll be useful.
As you might expect, other than, of course, being able to survive through your armor and being able to do enough damage through your weapon, movement speed boots are one of the most important items in speedrunning. Because simply moving faster does in fact improve your times. All right, and then a bit of a complicated skill setup here as Angormus is progressing through this zone, which is relatively linear to read. Ogham Village, you mostly are just going to be going over toward the left side here to find the boss arena, and then using an important environmental context clue to determine where a small quest objective is in the middle of the zone. While Angormus is doing that, I'm going to explain a little bit about how our first skill gem that we just added to our build is. So we're using these slams and shatters as you're seeing, and then also on his F key, if you look at the bottom right of the screen, Angormus has just assigned a skill called Frost Bomb. Frost Bomb essentially lowers enemy elemental resistances, meaning you're going to be doing more fire damage, cold damage, lightning damage. On the warrior, we're mostly going to be doing physical damage early on, and eventually a pretty significant fraction of that is going to become fire damage. That's going to be important for us. We want to lower those enemy resistances just to make sure that we can get more fire damage off, especially against fire-resistant bosses.
I start to matter early on because between Infernal Cry and the support gem choices I use, I get a lot of extra fire damage early on into the run, even before I start using Perfect Strike, a skill that's mainly built around getting strong ignites off, based off fire damage. This boss has a lot of different adds. In this boss case, the goal is to use my Rolling Slam on a bunch of these monsters to stack up a strong combo against him. He has a couple big slams though that are much more important to avoid, because basically, even though I'm a life armor-based character, basically all of them will one-shot me at this stage of the game, in most cases.
Yeah, to give you some idea, this character, the Executioner that we just defeated, has a pre-mitigation max slam damage between 350 and 425 damage. So Angormus, even with the physical damage reduction provided by his armor, his total HP pool is 230 right now, and that means that any of those slams, if they were to high roll, especially if Angormus had taken a little bit of chip damage earlier on in the fight, would die almost immediately.
Holy. Need to add some damage on because I'm not getting my primes for my stuns.
This is one of those circumstances where procedural item generation matters a lot. For very high skill players who are competing in these races, if you don't get a really good weapon, you obviously don't want to give up. There are still important prizes offered in the official races, as well as times on leaderboards that people care about. And so in this particular run, Angormus hasn't gotten a very good level 11 mace yet. And so as a consequence, this zone, which is a level 13 zone, is much, much more dangerous than it otherwise would be. And as a consequence, he's readjusting his support gems around and moving things in order to make sure that he can keep that slam and shatter combination going. This is one of the important things in adapting to different circumstances that separates games like Path of Exile 2 and others in its genre from speed games you may be familiar with. If you play precision platformers like Mario, for example, there's much less rote memorization and a lot more adaptability, both in sight reading the maps and in adjusting your skill build as you encounter different circumstances run to run. And another unique item, we're getting the typical Angormus RNG where he gets much better drops than anyone else would get in the same circumstance. Totally the only reason he's faster than me.
I do have a knack for it.
For better or worse.
It's actually good later.
And then again, as we oscillate between doing too little and too much damage, we may switch back to a one-handed mace. The reason that we would want to do that is because if we have an excess of damage and we're able to prime mobs with either one-handed mace or with a pair of dual-wielded one-handed maces, our base attack time will go down and we'll be attacking around 30% faster.
Here I'm going back to town to pick up a level 5 skill gem. We'll need that to be able to craft a specific gem later on in the run. I got my good weapon. Much sooner than I thought it would. I'll take this. See if I can pick up any Golderas. It does not look like I'm able to. Back into the manor. This skill gem here is going to be Perfect Strike, and I can only equip this if I'm level 14. And the goal is to be at the end of Act 1 at the boss at 14 on the dot. If it's possible. Right now I'm at good pace with level 12. I'll have to pick up 2 levels here, but with the Abyss in this zone, hopefully I'll be able to pick up a decent chunk of that. Alright, I'll need to put my chest back on.
One of the important environmental clues in this area, as Angormus continues progressing through some of the more dangerous combat in Act 1, is that you can see that the local count has gone completely mad and burrowed all the way through his manor all the way to the ground. You'll notice that we see these areas that most runners call bridges, where you can peer down into that void and see him digging deep into the basement, trying to uncover relics of some kind. That is going to be super duper important stuff because we want to be using that as a trick to figure out where exactly we are in the zone. This layout changes a lot from run to run, but that is an important environmental clue. Since we went from bottom left to top right in this first floor, as we descend deeper into the manor, hunting down the cunt who wrongly exiled us on our path of exile, we're going to be using those bridges to determine where we are in the manor. So we went from bottom left to top right on this floor, and as we descend into the next floor, we'll be going back to the bottom left and crisscrossing the manor floor to floor here. One of the things that I want to point out here about the combat difficulty is that the very beginning of the run, we're not underleveled, and so the combat is comparatively easy. other than a few important mini-bosses. But as we get toward this middle third of the run, toward the end of Act 1, the beginning of Act 2, we start to get very, very underleveled, and we can't yet use skills that have a higher level requirement, and those skills in this particular case end up being very broken for us. So this is the most dangerous part of the run, where even very high skill players who have hundreds of runs or who are used to competing in competitive race ladders, this is one of the more dangerous areas in the game. So you'll notice that Angormus is having to be much more careful about how and when he engages these mobs, if he chooses to fight things or not based on the randomly generated modifiers that show up. And all the same time, he's trying to get to level 14 to use that more powerful perfect strike. So this is a good opportunity here. Angormus is level 13 and a third. It's possible, but not likely, that there will be enough mob experience from these sort of junk monsters that we're fighting as we progress through the zone for him to hit his intended level here. As a consequence, he's going to probably need to use a backup strategy and not have Perfect Strike for the Act 1 boss called Count Geonor here. He could force it to get level 14, but it's just simply not worth the amount of time loss that we would incur, and as a consequence, it's just going to be easier to just use our vanilla Mace Strike, as well as some more careful positioning to kill the boss here in this circumstance. So this boss is called Count Geonor. You'll notice that sort of tendril monster in 12 o'clock in the arena there. That's called the Beast and is the central plot MacGuffin of the Path of Exile 2 campaign. Long story short, the Beast is an agent of pure chaos, and we're trying to hunt him down before the Count's misguided wife communes with the Beast and causes a cataclysm. I will leave it up to audience interpretation what communing with the Beast is.
Open the cage. Release the beast. Give me what you promised.
Count Geonor is a two-phase boss. You'll notice that we do a little over 50% of his base HP, and then he starts giving us a lot of dialogue. You can see that in the bottom left of Angormus' screen. He has dialogue turned off just so he can hear certain audio cues in combat more easily. But now Count Geonor, who will have been overcome by chaos and driven to madness, will transform into this six-legged, two-mouthed wolf monster thing, which is one of the most exciting boss fights early on in the game. He does big amounts of cold damage, and so Angormus is going to be trying to dodge all of these cold effects, which both, of course, are threatening to us because of the high amount of damage, but also slow our action speed via a mechanic called Chill. This works very similarly to a number of other games here. A lot of these area of effect attacks that he does are very threatening, so we'll need to dodge and wait for ones that are easier to punish.
It's look like we're gonna get a no phase here, no minion phase, which is nice.
Which is very, very important. We just barely skipped it there. When the wolf starts howling like that, there is an opportunity for him to go into a phase that most people colloquially call poetry. The boss disappears from the arena and summons a bunch of additional smaller wolves. It's not particularly threatening. It's not going to kill a high skill player, but it will be something that can result in pretty significant time loss. Between 30 and 40 seconds is what I would estimate for a poetry phase occurring. So getting that phase skip off, being able to get that damage out to make sure that we don't lose any time there is super important. And we have a 36-minute Act 1 exit, which is right on pace for what would be sort of a race-winning or a race-leading time there on most classes. A little bit slower than the best runs that occur. Now we're into Act 2, which is in a desert area called the Vastiri Outskirts. One thing that we're going to be looking for is, as we progress through this sort of large open red sands area that we're in right now, we're looking for one of these larger hyena centaur things called Wrathbreaker, who is a mini boss that allows us to sort of earn enough street cred for the locals to take us in. They're tired of being harassed by the hyena centaur things, and so killing the leader of the hyena centaur things is how we curry enough favor to progress the plot in Act 2. An important thing here is, as we progress through this area, we're again managing our experience, using our slam shatters to clear mobs, but we also are looking for the exit toward where that boss's arena is. There's a term used by a few different speedrunners. There's a small elbow-shaped bottleneck that can come off of this main zone, and there are ones that are shaped well and poorly. So Angormus just ran into a good one and a bad one right next to each other. You see that small elbow-shaped area. The one that is of uniform width is called a handsome macaroni, and the other one is called a wonky macaroni. The boss is always next to the handsome macaroni.
Great.
And now Angormus has leveled up to 14 and has Perfect Strike available. Perfect Strike, super important skill for us. It does a huge amount of fire damage. However, it does require us to channel for between 2.5 and 3 seconds, depending on our action speed available to us on our weapon, which means that we're a sitting duck for those 3 seconds, and we need to know the boss mechanics super duper well in order to get that channel off without being either stunned or damaged out of it. And
dealt with the ads.
And then he's casting those frost bombs, which, as you can see, if you look at the top there, you see that minus 25% icon at the top that shows that we've applied that 25% elemental resistances lower to that boss. And we're using both Infernal Cry and Perfect Strike to do huge chunks of fire damage. You can see he takes nearly a quarter of the boss's HP with just that one hit. And with a couple of vanilla mace strikes to follow it up, he's able to take down Wrathbreaker and go and talk to the leader of the local tribe and get into their caravan.
Holy. It's a nice mace.
Holy, what a nice one-handed mace. So a couple of important things for a build that Angormus is going to transition to later. He's going to continue progressing the plot. One thing that he has to do is go and see that these gates are closed. He's also shopping for a level 16 flask. He's level 14, but wants to be able to have that to hot swap in the second that it's available. But the one-handed mace that he just got has a couple of important modifiers on it. The most important one for the build we'll transition to later on is that it has +1 to all melee skills. Later on, we'll actually, confusingly, be doing damage using our shield, and that +1 melee skills modifier is going to be important for us because it will allow us to pick up an extra level for free, which gives us around 7 to 8% more damage later on as a multiplier to Shield Wall, which is the skill we'll be using in the second half of the run. So right now we're investigating areas of known corruption as we pursue the beast. We've lost track of where that monster from Act 1 has gone, and as a consequence, we need to track it down by just pursuing whatever rumors the locals have heard. We go over, whatever rumors the locals have heard. That means that we have to go over to this quarry and then eventually the mine beneath it. As we progress through here, we're going to be getting a couple of important things. The first one is that we're getting these crafting currencies, blacksmith's whetstones, which allow us to add quality damage to our weapon, and then armorer's scraps, which allow us to add quality to our defensive items, most importantly our shield later on. An important thing here that we want to note is that in the bottom of this area, once we go from the quarry into the mine, is that we will be fighting a boss called Ruja the Dread Engineer, who is, again, one of the more threatening early bosses. So making sure that we hit level 16 before we do that, so we can once again upgrade from a level 11 base mace to a level 16 base mace is an important jump in our amount of mace damage. But then also we want to be able to upgrade to those level 16 flasks, which give us a much higher amount of healing. Different bosses throughout the campaign do different types of damage. The damage types are physical, lightning, cold, fire, and chaos. And this next boss, pretty importantly, does a very large amount of fire damage. Angormus, unfortunately, has a very, very low amount of fire resistance at this point in the run, so it'll be a little bit of a riskier fight than it would be if he had gotten better items that had % fire resistance on them, but that's just part of the natural run-to-run variance, and it's something that you have to keep in mind and manage which fights will be more and less dangerous based on the stats that you get on your gear throughout the run.
I'm honestly quite happy with just not being negative resistance at this stage of the game. So every time you enter a new act, your resistance goes down by 10% across the board.
This zone is one of the ones that's a little bit harder to read for very beginning players, but easier to get a hold of as you practice it a bit more. You'll notice he's progressing through these large open areas with small winding corridors between them. And those larger open areas are just rectangles, and you can, for the most part, just run diagonally through them. So it's one of the first zones that I encourage new runners to try learning to read. It tends to be pretty quick, and we are now down into the mine. And as we progress through the game, we're getting higher level skill gems and upgrading the level of our skills. Each level, roughly speaking, adds between 8 and 10% more damage to whatever skill you're using. So as a consequence, every time that you level up the skill, you're dealing a bit more damage, and that will accumulate over the course of the run. The mine here is an interesting zone to read. It has a bunch of these sort of piled on top of each other spaghetti corridors, but the exit is almost always at exactly 12 o'clock relative to the entrance. So you'll notice we're being pushed away from where he entered over on the left side of that overlay map, and Angormus is going to be working both straight up and bearing a little bit left in order to make sure that he can find his way toward that boss arena. There is some variance in exactly where the boss arena can spawn, but there are context clues that you can use. The basic idea, though, is that even though he's never seen this particular map seed before, he can use that vague heuristic of just going toward 12 o'clock relative to the entrance to find those first context clues and work his way toward the boss.
This is one of those abysses that gives a good support gem. It gives us our first guaranteed level 2 support of the run. Otherwise, we'd have to wait until much later into the run before we get our first. So got lucky with it being a coffer. I got some extra currency out of it.
So currency, just to reiterate some of the vocabulary for people who don't know Path of Exile 2 here, currency is both used as a trading currency from player to player, as well as a crafting material that allows you to upgrade your items and add random modifiers to them. Higher tier currencies are very valuable in endgame situations, where important items might trade for, say, 10 to 20 divine orbs, which is an important endgame crafting material. And early on, you'll be using things like orbs of transmutation and augmentation to add basic modifiers to your items, which are a much weaker currency that's much less valuable to the endgame player. The thing that we'd be most excited about early on in the run would be a regal orb, which allows us to transition an item from having 2 modifiers to 3. And that's the transition between what are called magic items and rare items. And that's very, very important. Upgrading from magic to rare is a big boost for an important item to have. Here we fight Ruja. We actually skip her most dangerous phase where she comes swinging at us with her hook hand. And part of the reason we're able to do that is because Perfect Strike, when well timed and used alongside Frostbomb, which applies that exposure, you can do a huge chunk of damage and avoid that boss phase there.
No need to. I'll unburden you.
Now we're going to be progressing through a little bit of a more linear zone. We're shopping for some higher level reminders here. For some higher level armor bases here, we've hit that level 16 breakpoint. And now we're going to go into Trader's Passage. Trader's Passage is a much more linear zone. We're just going to be progressing mostly down and left away from the entrance and finding our way through these sneaking corridors. And as we do that, that would be a good time to read out donations if there are any available.
There's a couple different main variations on Trader Passage layouts. Whether we get this point of interest called the Six Sisters, whether it's early on, or whether you get a early Balbala occurrence.
Balbala will be a familiar enemy to any Path of Exile players who are watching GDQ with us today. there is an important game mechanic called ascending. So far in early access at the time of this recording, there are about half of the total character classes available. Classes are sort of your classical RPG archetypes, things like bow users versus mace users versus spellcasters. Ascending, though, allows you to do build-defining unique things. A good example is actually not on the warrior. Probably the best example is the difference between the different sorcerer ascendancies. One ascendancy for the sorcerer allows you to do powerful elemental damages with an ascendancy called the Storm Weaver, and the other one allows you to be a master of chronomancy, so you can do more slows, you can even rewind time. Those are both spellcasting builds. They might be using similar spells, but the archetype of wielding the storms versus pausing time itself is a good example of the difference between different ascendancies. Unfortunately, you need to complete a special area away from the main quest progression in order to ascend, and those ascendancy trials take around 6 to 8 minutes at the very shortest. And so we will actually be skipping ascending in this run and foregoing those powerful class-defining changes to our build. So Angormus is going to be playing a vanilla warrior, not a titan, not a smith of Katava, not a warbringer throughout the entire run.
Open the way. Steel yourself.
This is another one of those abysses that I'm hoping to come across. Thankfully this one is an Exalted Orb, which adds a modifier onto my yellow items, which can have a limit of up to 6. They're quite important for later on into the run for finishing off our items for and getting better gear towards the end of the run.
One of the important things to note is these green fissures that we're calling abysses, depending on the zone that you're in, where you are in the quest progression, they drop different guaranteed rewards. This is a hidden mechanic in the game that a majority of the player base may not be familiar with. And so one of the things that we're doing as speedrunners is making sure that we go after specific abysses for 2 reasons. One is to keep us in the desired part of the experience curve. We want to make sure that we're staying within that 1 to 3 level deficit compared to zone level, and they provide good mob density and high amounts of magic monsters for us to fight early on. And then the other thing is that they provide those guaranteed rewards that allow us to continue progressing our items in a more deterministic way.
What you just saw me do earlier when I reset a checkpoint up there, Sala doesn't actually follow us from the bridge unless you slay all these slow spawning statues that spawn afterwards, even though she opens up the gate early. So to reset her position onto me, I just reset the checkpoint there, that's a guaranteed location, just to move along a little bit faster.
And we are reaching the point where we will soon be transitioning toward our end game build, so we're going to be farming experience because we want to make sure that we transition pretty early on from this slam shatter, which is good, but tapers off a little bit compared to the best available build. Right now, I believe we're currently level 18 or 19.
We're at 19 and a half.
Nice. 19 and a half is very good on the experience curve at this point, and we will be getting to level 22, at which point we unlock level 7 skills. And level 7 skills give us access to a couple of important things, the most important of which is a skill called Shield Wall that we will be explaining when the time comes. And then here we fight the main plot boss of Act 2, Jamunra, the Risen King. Without getting too deep into the weeds, Jamunra is the leader of one of 2 main local groups, one of which oppresses the other, and Jamunra, in an attempt to overcome the oppression of the majority group, has ceded to chaos, which did not go well for him. He transforms into this horrible monster by the end of Act 2. And then you'll notice that in order to keep the amount of information about your available items and about your skill build in mind, keep track of how much currency you have and know where you might need to farm more of one item or another, or whether or not you should shop the next time that you go to town during those important plot phases where you get dialogue and where there are less threatening mobs available. Angormus will be opening his inventory, quickly reviewing what's available to keep it all fresh in mind, check what skill gems he has, check what level he is, all these different variables that he needs to track. And at the same time, he needs to move and dodge the mobs that are available. He's still shopping for movement speed boots. If you take a look at his shop here, you'll notice that there's a search bar at the bottom where he can type in various search terms that give him an opportunity to highlight items that have potentially valuable modifiers. The most important ones early on are going to be movement speed as well as max life. Armor is relatively weak at super low levels, and so max life, just boosting your total HP pool, is a much better way to get a higher amount of survivability going on.
Right now in this zone, there is a boss that also gives 2 weapon skill points. This is the backside of her arena. I was looking for a tell early on into the zone that would determine whether it would be early on my side of the map or on the opposite side of the map, and it turns out it was on my side.
Yeah, so the map is only very slowly revealed to us as we progress through these zones. The area that we're in right now, called Keth, is a large, approximately 2x1 rectangle, and fighting Kabbalah, the Constrictor Queen here, is important for us. It gives us another one of those weapon set point bonuses. So we're going to be applying elemental weakness to her with Frost Bomb, and then trying to stun her. And we get that Book of Specialization, which we consume, and that gives us 2 of those bifurcating skill points that we mentioned earlier.
We're quite good on the XP, we're at level 20 already. Guaranteed amulet reward from this building right here. It's usually your first source of one.
And amulets, very important. They provide a number of important stats here. We happen to get a Jade amulet, which is one of the better options, not the best.
However, we got armor and melee skills, which is an amazing roll.
Actually, so insane modifiers there. I want to explain one thing before we leave the zone, though. You may have noticed we entered on sand dunes and we left on brick. You can tell that you're closer to the exit of Keth when you transition from walking on sand to walking on that brick or tile, so that's an important environmental clue about where the exit will be. To go back to discussing this disgusting amulet, though, rolling 14% increased armor is incredibly important, as well as that +1 melee skills. +1 melee skills is the best possible offensive bonus on that amulet. That amulet +1 melee skills, again, is going to be providing between 7 and 10% more damage. Oh, I had 34% max life. Holy shit. Not percent max life, 34 flat max life. So this is an insane amulet. A Jade amulet base, which is what we happen to have grabbed, is something that's not the best possible base. It adds bonuses to our dexterity. Dexterity is mostly irrelevant for the warrior. It gives us a little bit of accuracy rating, which helps us to be more consistent in hitting mobs. But your melee chance to hit is non-zero, but relatively... your chance to miss is non-zero, but relatively low. So that accuracy rating is not too impactful for most melee characters. It's much more important on ranged characters like bow, crossbow, and spear users. But getting percent armor, as well as a big chunk of flat max life and plus melee skills, is going to be around the best amulet that we can get, other than it being on that dexterity base instead of a strength base.
Well, there are lots of random interesting events in this one. None of them are particularly useful for the style I'm playing. The Spirit Gem is only useful if we had gone into a different side area in Act 1 for Wraithorn and guaranteed 30 Spirit on our character, but for the sake of this run, the Warrior does not require Spirit to finish, so we won't be utilizing any Spirit Gems at all in this run.
So Spirit is an interesting mechanic in Path of Exile 2. To explain it briefly, it's a mechanic kind of like mana, but permanently reserved to activate important passive skills. To give you one example, on Warrior you might care about getting Herald of Ash, which says when you do damage in excess of an enemy's remaining life, that overkill damage is converted into AoE fire damage. Unfortunately, none of these offensive bonuses that we could get, and none of these defensive bonuses that we could get from any of those important spirit passive skills are going to be strong enough to offset the cost of us going out of our way to complete the little side quest that gives us access to that mechanic deterministically. If we happened to run into an item that gave us spirit in the wild, we may be able to use it, but that's a relatively infrequent occurrence in this sort of run.
There's two important events in this zone that are and level 7 skill gem is really big here. Allows me early access to Leap Slam, because we are quite limited on the number of gems we get access to in these runs.
So one of the things that's, to explain a little bit more in depth while Angormus manages his way through the zone, he mentioned two things there. One is important objectives in this zone. You're seeing the first one right now, where he's going to run in here, get an extra support gem, and he's also going to be fighting his way through this mob for experience. But to explain the other upcoming ones while he clears this larger mob, he's going to try and find the Abyss in this zone, those green fissures again. The guaranteed reward here for the Abyss in this zone is an item called a Lesser Jeweler's Orb. What LJOs do for us is they allow us to socket a third support gem into a given skill. This is a modifier that has to be added explicitly. You can't automatically add a third support gem. And so that Lesser Jeweler's Orb means that we're going to be able to pick up an extra modifier for a skill, and that skill modifier, roughly speaking, will give us a 30% more damage bonus, which is pretty important for us to pick up. The other thing that is important is that as we go through this run, there are very, very few ways to deterministically control our resistances to various types of elemental damage we may care about. And in this zone, there is a guaranteed way to pick between 3 rings, one which gives cold resistance, one which gives fire, and one which gives lightning. Your choice between those 3 will vary a little bit run to run, but Angormus, generically speaking, are you taking fire resistance?
I always take the lightning resistance at this point because of the Act 4 boss Benedictus. It's incredibly important to have high lightning resistance for that boss fight, and usually I can find a way to get enough fire and enough cold resistance to not really worry about it too much.
Got it. So this is a strategy that varies a little bit class to class and build to build and player to player, but that makes a lot of sense to me. Benedictus is probably the most threatening boss in the entire run. He's the penultimate boss. He does huge amounts of AoE physical damage that's easy to dodge, as well as large bursts of lightning damage that are harder to dodge. So getting that lightning damage, especially toward the end of the run, when you'll be particularly under-leveled. I believe Angormus is going to be completing around level 33. Is that roughly the plan?
I aim to go for 31, actually, now, because of the level 9 skill gem breakdown, but if I can get away, if I can't have the items to get away with it, I aim for 33. It mostly depends on the gearing situation.
Got it. So just to give some context for what that 31 number means, the final boss of this run is Tavakai, the chieftain of a tribe that we'll be running into in Act 4. And Tavakai, much like all of the other plot bosses, will have succumbed to corruption. Tavakai is level 54, so we're going to be completing a level 54 boss that a lot of the player base finds challenging at level 54, and we're going to be completing that at level 31, so nearly half the level of the intended boss fight mechanic. And then here we're going to be using Perfect Strike likely for the last time against an important mini-boss. This is Azarian the Forsaken Sun. He does mostly fire damage. We've stacked up enough max life now that we're probably not too threatened by him, but it is important to note that there are a couple of attacks that he can do that are very, very threatening to us. We want to make sure that we get rid of those. One thing that you can use as a heuristic for the rest of the run is any time that I mention that a boss does a particular type of damage, this boss does fire, other bosses will do lightning, cold, physical, it is likely the case that they are also resistant to that elemental type. So Azarian does fire and is resistant to fire. which is why it's so important that we got that frost bomb off, so we can make sure that we get our damage through his important elemental resistance. Now we're going to be transitioning to our new build here. We've just hit, I believe, level 21 and a half or so.
I am 22 actually.
Oh, he's 22 and a half. That's
so I'm
even
at
better.
the breakdown point to be using Shield Wall.
So Shield Wall, an important skill here. Shield Wall, a little bit hard to explain, but essentially it's almost a universal axiom of action RPG speedrunning that the best skill in a given patch is almost never a weapon-based skill. It's almost always a design oversight that something scales with something other than your main hand weapon damage, and this leads to balance engineers underestimating the potency of one thing or another. Shield Wall is a very interesting example. It's important for the speedrun because it allows us to stack armor, which gives us defensive bonuses, and convert that armor into offensive damage. And so it's super important for us. We get 25% block chance, which means we'll be mitigating a quarter of all of the hits that come in against us from these mobs. So that's a huge chunk of survivability, just 1/4 less damage taken. But it also means that we'll be able to convert the armor on that shield into area of effect, physical, and fire damage. So you can see he's putting down these sort of softly arcing lines of shield. And then when he breaks them with any other skill, with a war cry, with a slam or anything, that will do big area of effect, physical, and fire damage. As the build gets higher and higher level, we're going to be converting a higher and higher percentage of our shield's armor into physical damage, and this will allow us to do pretty significant damage while maintaining those defensive bonuses that we care about in the block chance and the additional armor of using a shield. And so that's going to make it much, much more survivable at higher levels than some other builds, while also doing best-in-class physical damage.
Is a very good chest piece I just got access to, 52 life total.
That's huge. And then what we're going to be doing in a lot of these circumstances while we're clearing mobs is placing shield wall and then either war cry shouting to break it or shield charging through it. Against bosses, though, we'll be placing shockwave totems on the ground. And what shockwave totems do is they sit there and they emit small shockwaves. This means that we can place 1 or 2 totems, and if we stagger them correctly, they'll be emitting alternating pulses every 0.7 of a second or so, and this will automatically break the shield walls as we place them, meaning that we're allowed to just continue placing shield walls continuously and getting much higher damage per second out in that way.
This land of the dead has no end.
Something that's very common to the PoE speedruns, if you're familiar with PoE 1, is the taking off of the chest anytime you think you're safe. Just try to get through an area slightly faster due to the movement speed penalty. Unfortunately, armor shields do carry a 3% less movement penalty too, and it stacks up to 8% with an armor chest piece.
It also provides a sneaky hidden benefit. Path of Exile 2, when it goes full release, as well as Path of Exile 1 are both free games, and they're funded primarily through microtransactions and supporter packs. What that ends up meaning for us is that if you want a cool looking cursor, you have to either pay for one, or you could just use the completely free microtransaction of holding a really cool looking chest armor and using that as your cursor. Sneaky hidden benefit to the speedrun tech there. You aura farm by holding a cool chest piece. And you can see we're doing enormous amounts of physical damage here with well-placed shield walls. We're able to use 5 or 6 shield walls there and completely break that enemy's HP down in just a couple of hits. It's even faster than Perfect Strike, which is intended to be the high skill, high risk, high reward offensive skill for warriors. And so this is a build that's very, very strong. Oh my gosh, what a plate build. 160 total armor on that
quite a
belt
nice one.
slot. I mean, that plate belt has more armor than your chest piece.
Oh yeah, it does. Oh no.
And 8.6 life regen per second.
Right.
I want to give a shout out to a particularly important Pathfinder, a member of the speedrun community. Path of Exile 2 has a very rich community of people sharing map reading tricks with each other, as well as builds, people producing guides in general, both from within and from without the speedrun community. People are sharing ideas all of the time. It's part of the big important experience of speedrunning the game, is participating in this sense of community. And this zone that we're running through right now, Valley of the Titans, was recently completely solved by a friend of ours named Lundberger. As it turns out that there are, I believe it's exactly 8. No, it's 12. There
Yes,
are
it's
12
12.
possible there are 12 possible Valley of Titans, and if you look at the orientation and shape of the entrance path, you can completely figure out where all of the little points of interest are in this zone. There are 3 ancient seals you need to unseal before you can enter into the Titan Grotto. This place is a graveyard for ancient titans, and so we need to unseal things there. What that means is that if you know exactly where those seals are, you can just beeline deterministically to exactly wherever they are. And it's a contribution for people in the community to do community service by trying to figure out what the sort of skeletal frameworks underlying each one of these zones are. Lundberger is a top runner of the game, as well as a very, very friendly guy. And he just dropped a PhD thesis in the map reading Discord a couple of weeks ago and completely solved this zone, which before this was a place where people would typically lose maybe a minute or so compared to the optimal pathfinding. It's a very large zone, and that would be an area where people would lose time sort of aimlessly searching for the seals before Lundberger solved it for all of us. This is not, Lund is not the only person who does this, by the way. This is a common activity in the game where people will run the same zone and provide examples of the zone many, many, many times in order to allow both themselves and other speedrunners to do this. It's a very rich community activity. I am not a top runner. I am not close to contending for world records or race wins, but this is something that I try to contribute as well, along with hosting community races and things. This is definitely a very positive aspect of the competitive environment that comes out of the official developer-hosted races, is that people share strategies very openly, despite there being prizes that people care about and community prestige on the line when you race. People are very open about sharing skill builds and map reading ideas with each other. It's a very positive aspect of the PoE speedrunning community.
You know a bit more about this zone than I do. I mostly go a little bit aimlessly on the wall hug here.
So this zone is not a completely solved zone, but there is a heuristic that I use when I'm running this. Because it's not completely solved, a lot of people prefer to put their time into making sure that they can run perfectly consistently in the zones that are fully solved and use vibes or aura or experience to run things. This zone is a bit hard to explain, but essentially it's a long, approximately 2x1 rectangle with the boss arena on one corner and the entrance on the opposite corner. So if you think of this long, skinny rectangle, on opposite ends of those rectangle, there are going to be narrow hallways that connect to things. But you can see defining things as a rectangle is a bit confusing when you're seeing all these narrow hallways that Angormus is running down. What I mean by a rectangle is that the whole arena, the whole map, is inside of an invisible rectangular shaped bounding box. And that bounding box sort of provides rails within which those hallways can spawn. So one of the things that you can do as you run through this zone is you find a long, skinny hallway that has an intermediary checkpoint on it, and that hallway will always contain, will always point along the long-sided direction of the rectangle that we're on. So if you look toward the right side, you can see that blue checkpoint, and you can see that it's on a down left-facing hallway, and that means that the long orientation of the invisible rectangle we're inside is from down left to top right, and we can therefore run from top right to down left and search for the boss along the way there.
That's the boss arena up there. Alrighty. My shield's pretty weak for this point of the game, but it's probably enough due to the nature of shield wall stage.
So to give you guys a ballpark of where we are in the run, we're roughly halfway to our total time. Our expected finishing time is around 2:40, and we're a minute and 10 in. We're halfway through Act 2, but Act 1 and Act 2 are much longer than Act 3 and Act 4, at least on the speedrun routing. As a consequence, we can sort of get a ballpark of where we are on gear. And like Angormus said, he's well below average for a shield that he could have at this point. All items are procedurally generated, and the most important modifier that we can get on our shield is increases to our armor. We can either get big additive armor bonus. A shield might have, for example, a base armor of 60, and we could get another up to around flat 60 armor to get us from 60 to 120. Then we can also get around 40% multiplicative armor on our shield. So we could get the best possible shield at this point would be something like 170 armor, approximately speaking. As we level up higher and higher, there are additional shield bases from level 22, 28, 31, and 36. And so as a consequence, we're going to be fishing for a higher and higher armor shield. In most runs, we're able to survive pretty late into the run with a total armor on our shield of around 100. And later on, we will be getting hopefully a shield with between 200 and 300 total armor on it. We can do with less than that if need be, but it's pretty easy to force things onto it. And Angormus has used a gambling mechanic there, spending money to generate random shields from that vendor and fished for a shield that was very, very good. I didn't see the total armor. I think it was 140.
Here's 121 with a 80 flat armor roll on a level, I think it's the level 16 base potentially. I'm not quite sure. It's the braced tower shield. What is much better is double the armor of the one I was using, and it gets over an important 15 armor breakpoint for more damage.
As we progress through this zone, this is one of my favorite zones in the run. This is called Deshar. Deshar is an important area to the local tribe. This is a place of mourning. This is a graveyard, but a more important thing for us as speedrunners is that it's level 28, and level 28 is a breakpoint for a bunch of important bases for the warrior. We can get trimmed greaves, we can get spired great helms, we can get temple mauls, we can get steel plates, we can get all of these items that will help us increase our armor, increase our survivability, get more strength, get more HP, all of these different things that we care about. And additionally, you'll notice that there are all of these vultures that will chase Angormus into the corner here, and this means that we are getting a bunch of opportunities to kill mobs that have the potential to drop important items for us, as well as catch up on a bunch of experience, and we're at an item breakpoint that's super important. So the next 3 or 4 zones, as we progress from a level 28 zone to a level 32 zone, we're going to start finding items that are potentially good enough to be endgame runs all the way through here. And we happen to have found a mini objective completely for free, the Fallen Dakara, who will give us yet another 2 weapon swap points there. She can spawn randomly at around 5 o'clock south of any of the towers in this zone. And as we progress through the zone, we can do a whole lot to try and find her, but happening to find her along our natural pathfinding as we search for the exit is very, very important there.
Right.
And then we find the exit here, and we will now enter into the Path of Mourning. Path of Mourning is a place where you're really going to see Warrior jump off compared to other builds at this same place. Angormus has access to Leap Slam, which is what it sounds like. You leap, you slam, and this will allow us in the next couple of zones to do important things where we can sort of cut corners, jump over from one tower to an adjacent tower, so we can do some rooftop hopping that will matter for us here.
This is a unique strongbox. It happens to respawn a rare a couple times, and the majority of the good loot you get in this game does come from rares outside of bosses.
Increased item rarity is a complicated mechanic in the game, but in Alk and a Regal, oh my gosh.
Yep.
So to explain why that's so important, Regals, to reiterate yet again, are an important currency that allow you to transition from magic to rare items, adding a 3rd modifier, unlocking a bunch of item power. And an Orb of Alchemy does 2 things. It can either upgrade a white item with no modifiers to an item that has 4 modifiers by itself, so it's a very powerful crafting item if you find a base item of a type that you like. But it also will allow you to completely re-roll a magic item. So if you find a base that you like, you can upgrade it from 0 to 2 modifiers, and if you don't hit any modifiers that you like, you can completely re-roll that item there. The other thing that you'll note is as we're progressing through this area, you start finding those bases that we're looking for in the end game. The first one that Angormus happened to find was a pair of boots, trimmed greaves. They didn't happen to have movement speed or armor or max life or anything else super important on them, so he discarded those, and we're going to be looking for a better pair of boots. But again, these sort of end game item upgrades start occurring around here.
No need. All right. Take care.
And then we're going to go vendor shopping, looking for some better items here. We need to upgrade our flask to a level 23 base flask now that we've hit that breakpoint, and we can do a lot more damage from that point onward.
Yeah, I got quite lucky with my flask earlier. I got an increased amount recovered of flask very early on the level 23 base, so I'm able to continue for quite a while before worrying about the next tier, the level 30 flask, the Colossal.
And then you can see we're doing this huge amount of AoE damage. We're under leveled at this point. I believe you're level, what, 20?
Yeah, I'm 5 levels below the zone currently.
But in order to stay on that experience curve, we start experiencing, there's a coefficient that scales the amount of experience that you'll get from the zone. So we want to stay within loose contact of the zone level. So Angormus is going to be taking a bit more experience in this zone than he might in other places. It happens to be the case that the next couple of zones after this is pretty difficult to use Shield Wall to clear, but this is a good place to showcase just how powerful Shield Wall is. We have a good but not phenomenal shield equipped right now, maybe around 80% of the potential of what we could have, and that will mean that we can, even with that shield being good, not great, we're still one-shotting everything in the zone, clearing full screens of enemies. And as we continue to search through this zone, Angormus is using a wayfinding algorithm to try and find a little quest objective here, the Sisters of Garukhan, which he clicks on and receives a permanent bonus of plus 10% to his lightning resistance, which is important for that endgame boss, one of the more challenging fights in the run, Benedictus, later on. And again, Leap Slam, as you can see here, very, very important. Allows us to do some jump. Allows us to get. Allows us to get.
Oh, no.
There we go! Yeah! W's in the chat, boys. We got the Leap Slam off.
That can be
It
one
allows
of the
us
tough
to cut
ones.
some corners. It's one of the. I think every warrior player has had that exact experience in this zone before. Sometimes the game just doesn't want to let you Leap Slam, and that's okay. Thank you for the W's in the chat, boys. I appreciate the support. Now, one of the things that I want to reiterate here as we get into this higher and higher level zones here, every time that Angormus is dodge rolling, you can see that he's dodge rolling and then holding onto that momentum, and that allows him to sprint, which again is a risk-reward mechanic. If he gets hit by a single projectile, he will be knocked over, lose 3 or 4 seconds, and be a sitting duck to the mob. One of the important things to note there is that if you want to be really good at speedrunning, you need to be able to sprint, because it gives you a 50% multiplicative bonus to your movement speed. And what that will end up meaning is that if you aren't sprinting through mobs, you're going slower than everyone else. But you need to be able to sprint through mobs despite the risk reward of potentially getting hit by the mob and losing a bunch of time and potentially dying. There we have found a braced tower shield. It had the less important percentage bonus to its armor,
Right.
but it lacked the more important additive bonus to its armor. So it's not as good as the shield that Angormus has equipped right now, which has a higher total amount of armor. Obviously, the best possible shield would have both the additive and multiplicative bonuses to our armor there.
The main things I'm looking for right now are high armor pieces of gear with life and ideally resistance, or a mana leech on a piece of gloves or rings, as well as some life leech there. Both help a lot with maintaining resources in the Act 4 portion of the run.
And then here we're finding a potentially endgame chest piece. the big amount of flat maximum life that we have on the one already is pretty important for us to hold on to, because it's just 10% more total life there. And we get caught in a mob, as happens sometimes, and need to reset. The other thing that I want to point out is that we're now in a level 31 zone. And what that means is that we're now at the breakpoint to activate those important level 9 skills. There are a couple of ones that are important. The warrior route has evolved a little bit in the last couple of days, and I've been focusing on other classes as I prepare for my own participation in the race competition. But I believe that that's when you get Fortifying Cry, correct?
Yes, Fortifying Cry is the main level 9 skill gem. A other breakdown is getting a good... just having a level 9 shield wall as well for the increased damage. And the increased damage...
Did you get that Topaz Charm?
I did not.
Ooh, nice belt. 18% lightning res.
A little bit of life on it. Slight upgrade. I have 2 chest pieces here. If I have augments later on, I could try to go for both of them.
So, like I said before, we're now fishing for a bunch of different things. We have a good enough shield that we could finish the run with it if we absolutely needed to. In a marathon environment, we may, depending on organizer preferences, stash a sort of middle of the range shield just so we don't get completely destroyed on stage. But this is a shield that's sort of a good middle of the road, not the best possible shield, and definitely not the worst possible shield that we have so far here. Angormus is going to continue fishing for those bases. I may talk over you if you find something particularly important to call out, but the next zone's pretty linear, so it's an opportunity for donations to be routed as well.
Alright, I'm going to take the opportunity to go to down here.
I'm going to take the opportunity to go to the bathroom here, BRB.
All right.
Alright, just selling my items. Let's see, I'm not going to get anything better than what I currently have on my amulet.
Stay in sight.
That is a very nice steel plate. It has life in double resistance and a little bit of extra armor for me. I will happily take that.
Goodbye.
I'll go back to Dreadnought Vanguard. Leveling up my shield wall again. It's quite the linear zone over here. You basically always run it the same way. Once you've run it a couple times, you should get a good feeling of where you should be in the zone. The only possible upgrades I'm looking for on like my mace, for example, would be a +2 to skill gems or a +1 alongside some attack speed, so my leap slam would be slightly faster for my main movement, but I'm more concerned about getting the damage just for my single target.
And I am back.
Welcome back. I got a very good chest piece while you're gone. A little bit of life, but 18 fire resistance and 19 cold resistance.
Nice. Decent chunk of regen per second as well. Everything helps.
With the way my current XP bars curve is looking, it's looking like I'm going to have to do a second run through of Dreadnought Vanguard just to get a proper amount of experience, so I'm not too far behind the curve entering Act 3.
Yeah, so I'm going to be very mathematical here for any nerds in the chat. Feel free to give me the nerd G and just, make fun of me. Twitch chat, you can also hit me with the doc rant preemptively. To explain more mathematically what we mean about staying on the XP curve, I mentioned this at a very high level earlier on. The way that it works is that if you are the same level as the zone, or up to 3 levels lower than the zone, you're completely safe. You get an additional 1 level of margin of safety for every 16 levels you are. So for example, a level 20 character can be up to 4 levels below zone level. A level 35 character can be up to 5 levels below zone level. What that means right now is that if Angormus starts falling too far behind, more than 4, 5, 6 levels behind the zone level, that will be increasingly bad. So even though it means that he will lose some time in the interim, he will definitely want to take that deficit because it will be increasingly penalizingly worse as he gets farther and farther behind the experience curve here. Right now we're in a level 32 zone, and I believe you just hit level 27?
I'm 28 now.
28 now. So
I'm planning on leaving at around 28.5 to 29 ideally, and I'm trying to fish for slightly more items when I'm behind. My
this is a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry, my resistances aren't that bleak right now, but I usually aim for a bit more than I have right now in the fire res department. But sometimes you just have to take what you get.
Uncut level 9, two uncut level 9s, very good. This is going to be the level that Angormus said he's planning on stopping leveling at, which is pretty important that you want to get all of your skills to that highest possible skill gem level. There are not that many guaranteed level 9 skill gem objectives in the game, so spending more time in these level 31, 32, 33 zones where you can potentially drop those level 9s is super important. One of the things to note here is that this particular zone, the caravan that we're fighting our way through, the Dreadnought, is a particularly good zone in terms of the possible drops, but a particularly difficult zone in terms of the positioning. Shield Wall is a large area of effect spell, and we're fighting our way through a bunch of narrow corridors. But now we've reached our desired level, plus a little bit of additional margin of safety, and as a consequence, we're ready for the boss fight. We now have a level 28 base shield with 80 flat armor on top of it. We have some armor scrap that we're holding on as well if we really, really wanted to increase our level here, and we're going to adjust our last few skill gems, make a swap from our support gems to switch from a mob clear configuration to a bossing configuration. We'll fight Jamunra. Jamunra is an interesting boss. When the game launched into early access in December of last year, it was a filter for a large number of the players. It was a pretty significant jump up at the end of Act 2, which has a scaling where you can complete quests in different orders, and so there was a smooth scaling for all those different bosses until you get to the final act apex boss, Jamunra here, who does a bunch of lightning damage that's particularly threatening to players who weren't very careful about managing their resistances. But for the speedrun, it tends to not be that difficult. He has very easy to dodge mechanics, and he's a very consistent fight for top-level players. Definitely something that when people are first getting into the game, it's a big bottleneck and point of pride to transition through him. And Jamunra, like others, has succumbed to chaos here, which is why he's a man sticking out of a corpse pile. A couple of important mechanics in the second half of this fight. Jamunra has this giant sword slam here that you need to dodge, or face tank, I suppose. Something that you definitely can't face tank on most classes. Warrior, though, being tankier is going to help. Most of his mechanics are not that threatening. There are a couple of AoE attacks that we will care about here. But you can see Angormus is taking big chunks of his life off with this. It looks like we're going to get a 131 exit, which would probably be in contention for a race lead if there were a major race going on, but a little bit slower than the best possible runs that would be exiting in the high 120s. In the mid to high 120s would be a good time.
Not yet.
Another alchemy orb, that's very nice. Let's see. I took off my chest piece, swapped out of my shield, so I'm moving faster without the penalties through the zone. Just a small optimization throughout towns when possible.
Saves a couple of seconds. So we're doing really well in terms of our chest piece and our shield. Our one-handed mace also has the most important modifier, which is +1 to melee skills. And we're doing reasonably well on our accessories. However, our boots, our gloves, and our helm, those sort of ancillary armor items, we're not doing too well on, and that means we'll have a little bit lower armor than we may like. Just kidding, that's a great helm. Holy smokes. But we're still missing out on boots and gloves compared to what we may really want. We do a little bit of shopping with that search filter that we talked about earlier, and then now we're going to progress into Act 3, entering through my favorite zone in the game aesthetically, the Sandswept Marsh. The environmental design of this place I really like. I like the sands, I like the bog, it looks cool. I like that Path of Exile, unlike some other games in the genre, chose to deliberately make these transition zones like Vestiria Outskirts and Sandswept Marsh, where you do get sort of a transition from the desert to the jungle through this sandy bog. Now that we've transitioned over fully to Shield Wall, Angormus has the opportunity here to do a quick respec at the cost of some gold, which he accumulated with the drops from those end of Act 2 bosses. He takes points out of two-handed mace bonuses, puts them into some defensive bonuses, gets around 100 total additional max life, and a couple of other bonuses on top of that. And then now we're going to be just trying to stay on XP curve, fighting our way through a couple of mobs, trying to stun things and stay alive. We dropped a yellow shield there, so potentially an upgrade. Depends on exactly what modifiers are on it. It's a very good shield, holy smokes. Does it have an open prefix?
It is a level 33 shield, unfortunately, so I'm just going to throw a Chaos or 2 on it. If it got better, I'd probably go for using it. It's not quite that much better than my current shield, so I'm not too worried about it. Even though it is quite a nice shield. From like a race environment, I wouldn't be leveling up to 33 to use that at all.
And then you can see here as we transition through, once again, there are more of those rare monsters with yellow names. Those rare monsters have modifiers on them. There are a couple of important ones there. You can see that we're fighting that wasp that had additional lightning damage, and here we're going to go check for an additional ring. Got a ruby ring. Oh, with 62. Oh God.
And extra fire damage. That's quite a nice ring.
Check him PC. Check him PC. Holy. So to explain a little bit of the meme there, Angormus just got an additional big chunk of fire resistance, which is important for some late Act 2 bosses. Ketzuli in the Temple of the Sun, Doryani at the end of Act 3, Tavakai at the end of Act 4. So a bunch of the most important bosses in the run require big amounts of fire resistance, and additionally the ring rolled for a huge chunk of max life. You'll notice that he has 800 total max life when on his main weapon swap, and that ring, I believe, had 70 max life on it.
It was 62. It was quite high.
62. So an additional approximately 8 to 10% of his overall survivability coming from that ring, in addition to a gigantic amount of additional bonus flat fire damage. So both offensively, in terms of that flat fire damage, and defensively, in terms of that max life and that resistance, that is a great ring. Finding a ring that good is probably a 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 runs type of activity. It's definitely one of the better things. And making use of those really good items that are different from run to run to run is part of the skill expression of the game, where you can see as players manage good and bad resistances, good and bad max HP, good and bad armor, good and bad damage. From each class, how you manage things is very, very different. We also got a unique that's potentially interesting, but it's a bit higher level than we want to be. It's a level 33 unique, but we won't be using it.
There's the cynic this group needs for
Yeah, no, that's just getting sold for 1,000.
the wisdom of the tribe. Like my clan.
Since there are people in the chat making the reference already, I will go ahead and call that Charcy food, and we'll see if anybody agrees that that is Charcy food.
There's nothing useful for me at this vendor. When I want to go gamble for items later on in the run, or when I hit stalemate on items, I'm going to go back to the Act 2 town to gamble and just continue at a level 31 run.
An important thing to note in the design of different people's routes for these races is that there are different breakpoints that you might care about, and I'll list a couple of them off for any PoE experts in the chat who want insight into the speedrun route design. Most of the time, builds will be transitioning to their endgame level somewhere in the very high 20s or in the low to mid 30s. And the reason for that is that there are a couple of important breakpoints that I'll list off. At level 28, most classes get their most important defensive and offensive base type upgrades for their items. For example, on the Ranger, you get dual string bows. If you're playing a mace-based warrior, that would be a temple maul. Additionally, at level 30, you get a flask type upgrade that will be very, very important. And then at level 31, you get access to level 9 skill gems, which is important because that's a new tier of skills as well as a new damage multiplier for skills that are lower level than that you upgrade to level 9. Beyond that, at level 33, there's another base type upgrade for most defensive items in the game, for your chest piece, your boots, your gloves, as well as at level 34, there's a hidden breakpoint for some of the most important offensive modifiers on weapons. For example, increased physical damage on bow, crossbow, and mace-based skills. There is a chance to roll to a higher tier of increased physical damage on those weapons. So if you're a PoE expert, you might be thinking through all of these different breakpoints, level 27, level 28, level 31, level 30, level 33, and picking the one where you feel you get the most offensive breakpoint. If you're a bit more conservative player like me, which you could think of as being a lower skill player, level 36 is a breakpoint you might be interested in as well for different reasons. But Angormus is now fighting the most iconic run-killing boss in the speedrun, Mighty Silver Fist, affectionately called Monkey. His pre-mitigation total physical hit damage is between 950 and 1100 on the current patch, which is enough to kill essentially anyone. So,
Sometimes,
get good, scrub.
Yeah, sometimes if you get lucky, even if you're hit by the slam, he can low roll it, or you could only get hit by one part of the slam, but it is quite a not a consistent thing to go for.
Because of the structure of general gameplay in Path of Exile 2, there is a seasonal reset that occurs every 4 months, and so everyone will reprogress through the campaign again to participate in the new endgame activities, to play new builds every 4 months. As a consequence, people tend to clip farm on the monkey and watch their favorite streamers, whether that's speedrunners or guide creators or community figures that they like watching. People tend to die to monkey on season reset, no matter how good they are. It's a frequent place for clip farming. So definitely something that is an iconic part of the culture of the game, is that every single time that we get a new league mechanic, a new season every 4 months, people are going to be farming those YouTube clip compilations of all of your favorite people dying to that monkey slam, no matter how experienced they are. A bunch of iconic community figures have died to that monkey over and over.
So since I'm ending the run at level 31, I have to go to the Act 2 town to get an appropriately leveled piece of gear. I'm just going to be going for some gloves
Gambling
here.
is tied to your level, not the area level.
Yes. But like these base items I'm unable to wear, right?
No. You can
really?
You can gamble the Act
Good
4 gamble vendor is tied to you, not area.
Gamble vendor is tied to me. Good to know. Good to know. Well, I still win here anyways.
Because like I frequently will gamble rings with excess money in Act 4, and you never get ring types that are like I do this all the time. This is 100% a fact.
I've never actually had to do it.
It's helpful to have a high knowledge but low skill person around to test all the backup strats.
Agreed. See me filling out my tree here. I have achieving Fortifying Cry. It is my second thing that I'm using a Lesser Jeweler's Orb on. I'm just going to finish crafting the rest of my gear as I run through this zone. It's not a particularly dangerous zone. The monsters are pretty spread out. If there's a rare, it's just by itself.
One thing that I want to mention is when you go through chimeral wetlands, through infested barrens, searching for chimeral wetlands here, is just how much interfacing there is between the speedrun community and the game developers for Path of Exile 2. Because the game is in early access, it's expected that there are a number of bugs, and speedrunners, being super knowledgeable about a number of the game mechanics, including things like map generation, for example, is particularly important, tend to be quicker to identify bugs than the community in general might be, simply because you don't care that much about map generation unless you're trying to go really, really fast. And so it actually happens that in a number of the different speedrunning discords, the developers are explicitly available. And I want to give a very positive shout out to a developer who goes by the username Suna. We discovered that there are some map generation bugs in this and a few zones connected to it. and Suna was very responsive to us identifying the bug and saying that they're going to start working on it. So it's definitely a very positive experience that I have in the game, where I'm just not used to the speedrun community, a developer explicitly being in the speedrun Discord and asking us for information and making sure that he tries to solve things that we run into. A lot of the positive bugs that you find that you can exploit in the run, and a lot of the negative bugs that you find that may brick your run or make things less consistent. The developers are very interested in hearing that feedback, and it's a very positive impression for me. I expect there to be bugs. It's an early access game, and the fact that the developers are so incredibly responsive is a very positive experience that I have in Path of Exile 2. No matter the amount of frustration that we do have when we run into those bugs.
This isn't the same fungus from back home, is it?
This zone that we're running through right now, called Chimeral Wetlands, is sort of where I think about transitioning to sort of the end game portion of the run. Angormus has hit his final level 31, and is now going to be mostly running through zones, chest armor off, dodging through mobs, and only fighting bosses for the rest of the run. So let's just reiterate, as we fight the Chimera here, how the build works. He places a couple of shield walls, he uses his war cry to shatter them and empower subsequent attacks, and then he's placing totems to automatically break his shield walls, so that way he can continue to just place them and continue that DPS cycle much more actively. You can see just how much offensive damage we're getting here. He's able to do 33,000 damage to Zyclution, the Chimera here, as we transition into the endgame build here. One important thing, though, as we get into the endgame here, you can see he's absolutely chugging mana potions, mana flask charges. And what that means is that as he's casting Shield Wall, this is a very mana-hungry build, and because Warrior is a lower intelligence class, being strength-based, you tend to have a much lower mana pool than you might on something like a spellcasting build, a Witch or a Sorceress. As a consequence, the quality of your mana flask matters a whole lot here. He happens to have a level 22 mana flask, but it has good modifiers on it. Because his base mana pool is so low, he doesn't need to have a higher mana flask than that. I'll need to stop talking here for a second so he can hear an environmental clue in this zone, which I will explain later on.
Nope, I did not hear it over this way. Must have been down there. Okay, must be down here. Yep, okay. Alright, I've got my environmental clue. All set.
So we are now in an ancient mechanarium by a great inventor of history named Jiquani. And Jiquani is part of an ancient civilization vaguely inspired by various Yucatan populations in real life. For example, the Aztec and the Olmec. Vaguely. In any case, what this ancient culture did was they were able to trap people's souls through ritual sacrifice and use them as empowering soul cores to empower various inventions. So what that audio cue was quest items create a sort of clanging sound when they spawn into the zone. And so when Angormus is walking around the zone, he can hear things off screen. He needs to find a number of these soul cores in order to empower the generator. So if you're watching someone speedrun Path of Exile 2, when they get to Jiquani's Mechanarium and Jiquani's Sanctum, these two zones, you'll notice that they almost always mute their music and shut up, so that way they can hear this off-screen environmental cue where these big green glowing beacons are coming from, these quest objective soul cores that allow him to turn on the generator there.
I was able to get 2 this time. Nice. We'll have to fight my way through for this one. A little bit.
So these soul cores can spawn at a number of different places in this zone, and they're randomly placed, which is why hearing them is so important. One of the interesting pieces of tech that we didn't need to showcase in this particular run is that every time that you respawn at a checkpoint, the location of those soul cores is reassigned. It's generated randomly. And so what you might do if you don't find them immediately is run out a large swath of the map to reveal it, and then after you do that, you just reset at the checkpoint until one happens to spawn within a revealed portion of your map. Now we're going to find Zikawatl, Warden of the Core. He's holding a very large soul core that we need to unblock a dam later on in the run here. Zikawatl has probably my favorite named attack in the game. He summons a red triangle that shoots out lightning, which for some reason I called the Spicy Dorito when I couldn't think of the word triangle, and that name seems to have stuck with a number of my friends in the speedrunning community who refer to Zikawatl's Dorito attack. It's a red triangle. That was what was in my head, and it stuck. People use it to make fun of me. We've now retrieved that soul core, and we're into Motlin Waterways. Motlin Waterways is one of the places in the run where the warrior's advantage over other base classes is particularly visible. One is these mobs that you're seeing are going to be shooting a mix of physical and fire damage. So maxing out your fire resistance here is particularly important, but it tends to be a number of weak hits from large mob sizes. So you can see he'll frequently be fighting 10, 15, 20 enemies at a time, but they're all doing small hits. And so as a consequence, Angormus is able to jump over some of these enemies and shrug them off with that high block chance and high armor. The other base physical defense types that happen in the game are much worse at dealing with a large number of small hits, those being evasion and energy shield for the dexterity and intelligence-based classes in the game. Those work differently. Energy shield tends to be good at dealing with one big hit, and evasion is a more mixed case that I won't get into the math of now, but just know that this is a place where that armor and block advantage really gets showcased. It's also my favorite zone to watch people engage and kite mobs in. If I watch any other warrior player in the game, you really see a big opportunity for skill expression here with how people move relative to the mobs, how they engage these levers. What you're doing is you're opening sluices that are draining parts of this lake in order to get into a main lever that drains a whole dam. And as you're dodging through all these mobs, how you position, where you choose to leap slam, where you choose to fight people versus dodge them is a big part of the skill expression and movement of the run, and a really well executed Motlin Waterways in my mind, where you can see Angormus is kiting mobs, he's waiting for things to drain, he's moving back and forth. It's one of the more elegant part of the runs in my mind. When I watch another high-level player, someone better than me, I'm always impressed visually by being able to see where they choose to dodge things, how they manage their flask, and how they're dealing with all these different zones. It happens to be a zone that's pretty easy to read in terms of where to go and when. It is a big coiled up map where you're going to need to double back a lot, but it's pretty clear from the structure of the dams where you're supposed to go, at least once you've run it 3 or 4 times. But I'm very, very impressed by people's ability to engage all these different mobs, how they choose to structure their build defensively in terms of their skill choices and their passive choices to dodge to all this. As Angormus goes through the last third of the zone here, he has a pretty normal amount of armor, so it's not a particularly threatening zone for a player of Angormus's skill or anyone close to him. I would probably be able to run this zone pretty safely at this same armor and resistance amount, even though I'm a much worse player. But this is a good time because the zone's pretty linear and we have around a 2 or 3 minute gap before the next zone for more donations to be read as well.
Protection!
We're about to see the portal skip coming up. Infamous.
So the official casters for the developer-hosted races are community figures named Ziggy and Rise QT, and this is a thing that they love to point out. If you open a portal and then activate the large canal lever, you can skip a very small dialogue. It saves around 1.5 seconds. It's not that important in a 3-hour run, but you can skip a small map animation there that shows the lake draining, and that allows you to get into the next zone around 1.5 seconds earlier. Those community figures who cast the main races love to point this out because it's a very visually obvious example of a very small amount of knowledge making a very small optimization, and this is something that wouldn't be known by the general player base, but it's really visually obvious when you see someone do it, that it's a weird ordering of activities that saves time in the speedrun routing. I want to point out, Ziggy and Rise are beloved community casters. I am not making fun of them in any way. It's just a funny thing in the speedrun community that it's such a small optimization that they point out so religiously during the official races. Now we're into the Drowned City, a zone that we will, in some sense, run twice, as you guys will see later. The Drowned City is a very interesting zone. It consists of this ancient lake being drained, and now we're pathing our way through this mossy, muddy, mucky lake bed, which had an ancient civilization at the bottom of it. An important thing is that the exit here can spawn in multiple different locations, and it happens to be the case that the way that the RNG algorithm the way that the RNG works for this zone is that when you enter and you see the placement of a particular bridge early on in the zone, if you have a mental grid mapped out and you know what tile placement that early bridge location is on, you can use that to determine exactly where the exit is. This is a relatively recent and relatively complicated discovery to explain, so even most top runners haven't yet memorized the table base for this zone. But discovering this sort of thing by running the zone hundreds and hundreds of times, multiple people sharing scores and scores of examples of the zone, is what allows us to save 45 seconds here. You can see that Angormus, who I will remind you is the best speedrunner in the game, made a mistake, didn't read the initial zone correctly, and that's not abnormal. That's not an unusual mistake. This is a very, very recent discovery. The full solution for this zone was posted maybe 2 or 3 days ago, and it's a very, very complicated solution out of many dozens of zones in the game. So it's not abnormal that a very high-end runner would not yet have that memorized. But it will be something that over the course of the next few weeks, months, and years, as official races continue to sort of bolster the speedrunning community, that more and more high-end runners of the game will have to memorize more and more of those table-based solutions, and that's a common pastime activity for speedrunners in the game.
There's other zones that I've been working on. I usually in this zone I've been going for a consistency strat on the best outcome in that zone without doing any sort of like reading is to go on to the right. And then check for the 2 out of 3 exits almost immediately. It's just like in this zone, this is the fastest exit to look for. I haven't learned it particularly well, but this is the best outcome, so I went for the best outcome, and it works. In this zone, it's a 50-50. It can be over here, but it's a much larger loop when it's a dead end that way.
And then here we will fight the Queen of Filth, one of many visually impactful bosses in the run. I will summarize it as. In the speedrun routing, a high-skill player wouldn't struggle with her particularly. Her max slam does around 650 pre-mitigation max hit. Angormus has 900 HP, so provided that he stays at or close to full HP, she's not particularly threatening in most circumstances. There are 1 or 2 things that can trip you up. But for a lot of players who are learning the game or getting into the game casually, she can be a very challenging boss. And so that ends up meaning that watching the speedrun, a lot of people are very impressed with this, but practicing it a little bit, it's not very difficult on the sorts of speedrunning builds that people come up with. She drops an ancient relic, and that ancient relic is going to allow us to unlock the Temple of the Sun. The Temple of the Sun is a pure gamble. It's a common feature for speedrunners to engage their Twitch chat community in Twitch predictions. You guys can go ahead and put a 1, a 2, a 3 in the chat. On this first floor, it's triangular, and the exit will be in one of the 3 corners. And there's no way to know which one of the 3 corners. It is not a solved zone. In fact, it is thought that it is an unsolvable zone.
And you run through the middle, you run through the ancient sun.
So they have an artificial sun, once again powered by that soul core technology. Angormus is checking the far corner first.
1 out of 3.
And he got a first way exit. Now on this next floor, there are going to be large fissures in the floor. Not this green abyssal fissure that Angormus is dodging right now, but these large fissures on the floor that block off some access to paths. And the pattern of those way-blocking fissures allows Angormus to know in which corner the exit of the second floor is. And then we're going to go and fight Ketzuli, High Priest of the Sun, who does enormous amounts of fire damage but has a low HP pool. So we're not going to get to see a lot of his cool mechanics, including the affectionately named Frogger attack, where you need to dodge all of his little sun orbs. But Angormus is going to be dealing too much damage for us to see that, at least in most cases. And Ketzuli will get stunned. Fun piece of trivia for you there, that attack that he just did where he says the heat radiates and then he jumps around the arena doing AoE fire blasts. He does a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 7 jumps. It's 2 plus 1 jump for every 10% max HP he's missing. So if he were missing 20% HP, he would do 4 of them. If he were missing half his HP, he would do all 7. And so you can predict exactly where he will end and line up any special attacks that you have that are channeling attacks or that have longer cast animations based on that knowledge. Fortunately, Angormus has a very good shield and didn't need to do anything on that basis. Angormus shopping for a better mana flask. While we wait, we have now progressed through the Temple of the Sun, and to skip an enormous amount of plot exposition, the Temple of the Sun included an ancient gateway. Activating that ancient gateway allows us to travel 3,000 years in the past, and we are now in the past in the version of the drowned city before it was clogged by the lake. And now we are going to go and go back to the days preceding the last great cataclysm. This is hard to explain, but remember I said when you commune with the beast, that's bad. That causes cataclysms. This happened thousands of years ago and was the end of this pseudo-Aztec, pseudo-Olmec society. And their greatest mind, Doryani, the royal thaumaturge, oversaw Queen Atziri's communion with the beast. And Angormus is pathing toward confronting Doryani in an effort to recruit him to come to the present to help us avoid the modern cataclysm, because the ancient one is unavoidable. Time travel is complicated. We're in the past to get an expert from the last time the bad thing happened to help him deal with the next time the bad thing happened. But the people in the past aren't happy that we're here trying to steal their leader. Now we're going to fight Viper Napwatsi, who is head of the Royal Vanguard. She herself does huge amounts of poison and physical damage, and she moves around a lot. One thing that players may not know is that her initial attack cycle, her choice of which attack animation to use, is dependent on where you are standing relative to her when the fight starts. So if you want a consistent set of attack animations from Viper, you choose to stand in a different position based on what class and skill build you're playing. Some ranged players may choose to stand farther away and bait out a lunge from her. Some melee players may choose to bait out different attack cycles. And then she has invulnerability phases where she imbues the Royal Vanguard spears with big amounts of poison, and you can use the invulnerability frames, the I-frames on your dodge roll to just dodge under those poison spears, which is a pretty easy and consistent rhythm to learn. And then when she stands still, when she's in attack animations where we can punish her, we can stun her like this and do big chunks. She's pretty difficult if you have a build that doesn't do a quick attack animation, but she has a very low amount of base HP, so she's pretty easy to kite out specific animation from and punish very consistently. So now we have defeated her, and we are going to swap out from our boss killing to our mob clearing support gem configurations. You'll notice that Angormus is opening his skill menu on the left side of the screen and swapping out skills as he runs between mob sections and boss sections of the run. There's a lot of configuration here. You have pretty minimal skill gem resources, so getting utility out of different options is pretty important. The skill build is going to get a little bit more complicated as we enter Act 4 and try to stack up different offensive multipliers that I will forego explaining. If you're a PoE player, just know that we're also trying to stack up things like marks in order to be able to get mark for death and break armor. But the important thing to know here is just that we're trying to stack up more offensive multipliers, because we are now level 31 in a level 44 zone, and we will be trying to get all the way through the run to get through the end. We are now in the ancient version of the Apex of Filth, which you may remember from a couple zones ago where we fought the Queen of Filth. And now we're going to be jumping our way toward the Black Chambers, where we will confront Doriani, who is the apex boss of Act 3, and we're going to recruit him to come to the modern day.
This zone and the next zone, the Black Chambers, are pretty deterministic zones. They almost always have the same layouts, with just some minor configurations on like which rooms are accessible which way.
Yeah, to give you some idea, barring any major mistakes or needs the checkpoint reset, the difference between the best run and the worst run of of the Agorot, the zone that we just passed through, is around 11 seconds, and the zone as a whole takes around 75 seconds. So very, very, very small variance. If you're used to other speed games, you may think of 11 seconds on a 70-second segment as being a lot of variance. That is absolutely not the case in a game like Path of Exile. We're also starting to forego some side quest objectives. It happens in the live Twitch chat as we're recording this VOD. Someone asked about a particular side quest objective. We're choosing which benefits to take based on the sort of effective payoff of those side quests. The one that was asked about takes around an extra 1.5 to 2.5 minutes to complete and provides some more skill points to us, but those skill points don't pay us back with an extra 2 minutes of time save, so it's effectively a time loss. If you're a very, very high skill player, those side quest objectives are not as important as you would expect, because those extra 2 skill points don't get you enough offensive benefit to pay you back those 2 minutes later on. And then here we are fighting Doriani, Royal Thaumaturge. Personally, in terms of his aesthetic design, I think that he's very, very interesting. Thaumaturge is an interesting word. It means that he's an engineer of magic. So you've heard of civil engineers, and you've heard of electrical engineers, and you've heard of mechanical engineers, and now you've heard of magic engineers. Doriani, the Royal Thaumaturge, is the chief magic architect of a lot of the infrastructure that exists in this ancient society, and wields various types of magics that they've uncovered. That's what the word means. Times to complete Act 2 vary from patch to patch. This run will probably be submitted with a 3-hour estimate, I would guess. It depends on exactly what Angormus wants to submit. In the previous patch, things were much faster to this zone, and in the next patch they might be slower again. This is sort of a middle-of-the-road patch for us, but in the previous meta there was a disgustingly broken skill and support gem combination with Rake and Stomping Ground. And so times to complete Doriani in that patch for very high-end players were between an hour 35 and an hour 45, and more consistently here we're in the hour 58 to 205 range, so 10 or 15 minutes slower than in the previous patch. But this is a much more stable game as we get deeper and deeper into the run. If you're a Path of Exile fan in chat, I want to point out Doriani's triumph here in the game files is called the Mecha Crab, and I only know that because I was at one point looking for a nice desktop background, and I like the design of this boss, and I found the ArtStation account of the 3D animator who made Doriani's Mecha Crab. I would encourage you, for games that you love, no matter whether you're a Path of Exile fan or anything else, to go looking around for the ArtStation accounts of the game's environmental designers, boss designers, character designers of games that you care about, because you can find a lot of interesting concept art and things that way from designers who showcase their profiles, and you can see a whole lot of interesting stuff there. I happen to really enjoy that boss. I happen to really enjoy the aesthetic of Act 3, and so I've looked around for that and found a whole lot here that I've really enjoyed. So that's the end of Act 3. We're right on pace for a pretty good run. A 206 or 207 Act exit is pretty typical. And then this is a good time to read out donations, because we're just doing some quest dialogue that doesn't matter that much. Doriani has come with us to the present day, and now we're going to the Karawi archipelago to search for the remnants of an ancient weapon, but I'll explain that more as we get through the act, and you have around 2 or 3 minutes to read out donations here if you would like.
I recently found this out, but in the current state of the game, you can roll out of Alva's Talk with Rog, and then click the Rog to get this boat charter. But what'll happen is you end up losing out on Rog later in the act. He doesn't show up back to town.
Fascinating.
But he gets me to the ship a little bit faster. I have to click through less dialogue.
We've arrived.
All right, so now we have to run through 3 zones that we can do in any order to get the 3 different pieces of an ancient weapon. Getting 3 things and then combining them is something that you do a lot in playthroughs of ARPGs. In Act 2, we got 3 different things and combine them. In Act 4, we get 3 different things and combine them. This is a common feature of other games in the genre that I won't mention. But just so you know, this is a common thing. We can do this in any order. Different runners will choose different orderings, and this will change patch to patch. But Angormus is running Shrike Island first. Shrike Island is a pretty linear zone. It's just a big spiral of narrow hallways, and as you run through all of these, you will eventually fight a big angry zombie bird who vomits blood that does AoE physical damage. It's as gross as it sounds, but oh well. There are a couple of different reasons that you would choose different boss orderings. I haven't talked with Angormus ahead of time about why he runs Shrike Island first.
Yeah, the Abyss here gives a guaranteed T4 support gem, and I need that to do my Fortifying Cry combo on bosses to basically have 100% uptime on it.
I see. Very interesting. The other mini bosses that you will fight later on are a mermaid and a
Something not to have to do this.
demon prisoner. Those next 2 bosses are usually run consecutively. The reason that they're run consecutively is because they both do cold damage, and the cold damage bonus there is pretty important. So that way you can only gear swap once, have your cold damage, your cold resistance maxed out in both of these zones, and be able to run that out. But we're just in this linear zone, and Angormus is clearing a mob. This is another good time for donations, if there are some.
Oh, got the fake Abyss. So there's a second one later in the zone that has a T4 support gem.
Tragic.
That's no Kardui shrine. Whose is it then?
What? Sometimes multiple abysses can spawn in a zone. This is one of those cases.
Another interesting thing to note about the bosses in Act 4, we're doing a pretty minimal run of Act 4. We're very underleveled. We're not doing any of the side quest objectives. There's easily twice as much total content in Act 4 as we will be able to see. But one of the interesting things to note is that since you can run these 3 mandatory bosses in any order, their HP and level scale with how many you've previously completed. So as an example, you would be able to run the bird first and have the bird be level 46, or you can run the bird third and have the bird be level 49. This will change the boss's amount of damage done as well as their amount of HP in their HP pool. You may consider this as a significant variable if you don't care about support gems. The bird has the lowest HP pool and the lowest damage of the 3 mandatory bosses that we're talking about running. So as a consequence, running the bird third in some route configurations really, really matters. Unfortunately, we have not found the abyss that we needed, which is not a good sign, and we are reaching the end here.
I have a backup for a support gem. I just go to Wakapanu Island instead. And the crab there's a guaranteed point of interest that is a crab scorpion combo that drops a T4 support gem as well. It will require me finding it.
So this is an interesting zone. First, before I mention how to read Whakapanu Island, I want to mention two things. One is Grinding Gear Games, the developers of Path of Exile 2, are a New Zealand-based developer, and as a consequence, they have put in this archipelago with a lot of influence from New Zealand in particular. A lot of the characters have very strong Kiwi accents, and also the tribe who inhabit this archipelago, the Karawi, are a very Maori-inspired culture, and so there's a lot of phonetics in the spellings of these zones that is not typical if you are a North American English speaker. And so the WH at the beginning of Whakapanu Island is, I learned, pronounced as an F because that's how it's transliterated from Maori to English as a WH for cultural reasons I don't understand and want to make sure that I am vocally respected. Another thing that I want to point out about this strategy that Angormus is going for here, he left the previous zone, Shrike Island with the bird, and now he is running a different zone, Whakapanu Island. That previous instance will only stay open for a minimum of 8 minutes and a maximum of 15 minutes after he's gone. So if he's gone more than 8 minutes, he's risking that previous instance closing and needing to rerun that zone. For Angormus, this is not a particularly big deal. For a runner like me, this would be a very risky thing to do, as it might take me 8 minutes to clear Whakapanu Island on its own.
So right now I'm just searching. I'm searching for two different beaches. I'm searching for the beach with the crab, and I'm searching for the beach with the exit. I believe the beach with the exit is up above. And the beach with the crab could be to the left. They can be in different positions, so either one's a good one to find. It's starting to look like it could be the exit beach. Down this way.
I think this is 8U, so I think this has to be the exit beach. Sorry, that's some deep inside baseball there for a second. So to explain what I mean by 8U, Whakapanu Island has 8 known complete layouts that the speedrun community has deduced together. The notes were compiled again by that runner I mentioned earlier, Lundberger. There is a sort of flowchart pathing algorithm to figure out where the various points of interests are in this zone. And the layouts can be shaped in a line, an S, or a U. So this is layout 8, and it has a U shape, which you can determine from the entry tiles to this zone. That is like deep inside baseball knowledge. Now we are going to progress into the Singing Caverns. The Singing Caverns contain the mermaid, but because we entered that previous zone, we want to make sure we go back and complete Shrike Island before our instance closes. You'll notice once we load Shrike Island, which will take a second here, Angormus is going to be able to checkpoint hop from the beginning of Shrike Island to the end of Shrike Island without rerunning the zone, because it should be the case that this previous instance is still open, and indeed it is. He now has his level 4 gem, and he can go ahead and put that in shield wall. He can swap things here, and he can fight the big zombie bird thing. You'll notice he's now doing an insane amount of damage per hit, between 15 and 20,000 per broken shield wall, and that's going to be enough to essentially 6 or 8 shot this boss, even though he's around 15 levels below the boss level. Very, very risky fight here. This is a boss that has a lower HP pool, so if you have a really excellent shield, you may not see those boss mechanics at all, and it can be a bit more difficult to fight the boss when you're used to skipping those boss mechanics, but Angormus did a good job there managing his flask and positioning well.
We made it.
And then now we're going to go run the Abandoned Prison. The Abandoned Prison is a very interesting zone for a couple of reasons. There are a bunch of side quest objectives that are important if you're doing a vanilla playthrough as a casual player, or even as a very intense player, but just not as a speedrunner. As a speedrunner, though, it's probably my favorite Act 4 zone to read, The reason being that, first off, jail-themed levels are a common feature in the genre, and so this feels like an homage to earlier titles to me. But also, the pathfinding in here is very interesting. It's a bit hard to describe, but you're trying to go through the sort of general jail and get all the way into an area called solitary confinement. You'll notice that we're going through a number of these gateways, and the combinations of these gateway and lever positions will tell Angormus where the end is. So we're actually in a gigantic open hallway map, and you'll notice he's taking a very narrow linear path all the way through. And much like Motlin Waterways, that place where we were opening the sluices in Act 3, there's a lot of skill in where and when you choose to engage mobs here. There's some threatening mobs that you might need to deal with. And so choosing where and when to engage mobs is going to be super duper important to how you read this zone. So Angormus is going to need to manage his flask. I think he needs to double back over here to the right, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. Just grab that checkpoint for safety over here. Right. Here's the prison gate tile, and it is parallel with the ship. So this would put us in the what we call the 0-1, I believe. Be incorrect about that. I believe this might be the only one with a south exit after passing through the middle here.
And you can see Angormus happens to be getting punished. He's done a really good job the entire run of not getting punished on sprint falls. And now we have found our way over to solitary confinement. This is one of the more winding orientations. Now that we've found solitary confinement, we can go back and find our way through the Singing Caverns. Is there a reason that we're zone hopping here?
The main reason is I'm able to fight both these bosses at lower levels still. Like this is a level 47 zone still, and that zone there is only a level 48 instead of being a 49.
I see. That's complicated to explain. I understand it. Let me think. Okay, so the bosses are within the instances that we are currently in. If I complete boss A before opening the map that boss B is in, then boss B will gain a level. However, if I open both instances and then complete the two bosses without reopening them, I will end up in the same. The bosses will the boss will be one level lower and therefore around 3% easier to kill. This is Diamora, the Song of Death. She's a literal siren. She's an ancient sea creature who shows us a mermaid's body to bring us in.
None shall pass.
And then she has a phase where she tries to sing and petrify us. If we stay outside of her singing radius, we do not get petrified.
And it is worth noting that all these like water mirrors at the edge of the arena also reflect it. So you have to be careful in the space from where your mouse cursor is. So I have to be careful, like when fighting these ads, to also not be ending up petrified, because it could be an end run under.
Yeah, you can see if he looks at it for just a second. One thing is you'll see a debuff show up on the left side of his screen, and the other thing is you'll see a small golden flash on his character. So as you see all these things, there are these little golden rays of light here. The other thing is all these water spires that she's summoning do big amounts of cold damage. Cold damage, in addition to threatening to kill us, also slows our action speed, both our skill speed and our movement speed. And so as a consequence, we really, really want to dodge that cold damage because it can do this to us. It can hold us still and be very, very threatening. It happens that Angormus dodged a lot of the early cold damage, and therefore that last little bit that he did take wasn't as threatening as it otherwise would be.
I'm not ready.
And then this is a good opportunity for donations as well. While we wait through an additional phase for Diamora, Angormus is going to just continue cutting out these mobs, and I would interrupt donations if there were a tense moment in the fight, but we're in a pretty safe position here.
I'm not ready. Protection!
Be right back.
Right, now we can return back to solitary confinement and run through the end of this zone. This is one of the cooler zones in the game because there is this wave mechanic throughout the zone that affects you when you're touching the ground. Thankfully, because I am a warrior using a mace, I'm able to leap slam through the water and not be slowed down. There's a lot of dangerous mobs in this zone, like these guys who teleport onto you, and these larger fellas who have a tentacle slam, where they pull out tentacles and they slam down on either end of you. Thankfully, I can just run on through the zone. These Tide Crashers, I believe they're called.
There is a lot of interesting stuff in this zone. The next boss that we're going to fight at the end of the zone is called the Forgotten Prisoner. So it's solitary confinement for one particular monster. As we run through the zone, you'll notice that there's a lot of cold damage here as well from the cold water. Somehow we're in a tropical archipelago that also contains frigid Arctic seas. I don't understand it either. Suspend your disbelief, please. In any case, as we go through here, we're going to fight the abandoned prisoner, and like Angormus said, prior to that, we're dodging the mobs and managing the slow that come through from those environmental waves. Things are pretty easy for us. And then now we progress into solitary confinement itself. We're going to activate some levers here and then fight a boss who does big physical slams along with cold damage. Happens to be pretty easy to fight for most builds, including especially for our shield wall warrior. And then now, as we get into this zone here, you'll notice that he's chained down, and our mere presence causes him to break his shackles, which is interesting. Maybe the water that we drained out of his room was weakening him somehow. But as we fight him, you'll notice that at various key points, these ballistas that are on the edge of the room, we have to activate them in order to pin him back down and eventually kill him. We're going to be doing big chunks of physical damage here with our shield walls, as well as some fire damage.
You don't get the ballistas right away, he starts to regen up. He ends up using it as a weapon against us for a little bit, every time we do that.
Then he does these AoE rings of cold damage. We try to dodge through them so that way we aren't chilled for as long as possible. And then you'll see he regens pretty quickly, so Angormus is kiting him toward a particular favored ballista. They're on all sides of the room, so you can choose whichever one you like, but making sure that you fight him really, really close to this ballista prevents that regen. The boss's HP pool is actually not that high. He has a lower total base HP than the Act 3 Apex boss Doriani did, but because of that regen, his effective HP in a lot of circumstances is much higher than Doriani, unless you're particularly on the spot about activating these ballistas. We appear to have encountered a bug.
It's the first time I've encountered that one. Alright, let's just reset real quick. Run it back.
We go back to the beginning just to grab those flask charges from the waypoint, as well as healing all the way back up, so that way we can use our life and mana flasks to fight our way through this boss. An important thing to note here is that in Act 4, All of these mini bosses that we're fighting, the mermaid, the prisoner, the bird, all of them are not particularly threatening at Angormus's total max HP pool, provided that Angormus stays at this max HP amount. What that means is, if Angormus is at half HP and then gets slammed, he can die. If he's at full HP, he can face tank almost anything he wants to. There are a couple of slams that are exceptions to that later on in the run, when we fight Benedictus, who has both a big physical slam and a big lightning beam that can do enough damage to really meaningfully damage you. But for the most part, Angormus has itemized in such a way that he can happily face tank things in order to get more damage per second uptime. You'll notice that he just continues spamming his offensive attacks even as he does things there.
Oh, life leech, nice. Late life leech pickup.
You love to see it. So now we've gathered the 3 points of interest, excuse me, the 3 parts of the ancient weapon that we need, and now we need to go to an ancient forge to reforge Aragorn's sword. I mean, to reforge the ancient weapon against the beast. And as a consequence, we need to go back to town here. We talk to some NPCs, and now we go to Arastus. Arastus is a beautiful zone overseen by the Twilight Order, who are a religious order that, confusingly enough, do not believe in deities. They are an atheistic religious order, if I understand correctly. In any case, what we're going to do here is we talk to this missionary, and he will go and get the overseer of the order, who will confront us. We're betrayed by one of our companions, and then we have to fight our way through town in order to get to the ancient forge, which is being unveiled at a dig site north of town. Now that all the different pieces of the weapon are together in one place, everyone is vying to take the weapon from each other because it is a pathway to abilities some may consider to be unnatural. In any case, we have to fight our way through town here. It's a pretty linear town, and I think it's very pretty, so I'll just let you guys enjoy it visually. There's a lot of lavender and a lot of gold throughout the town. It's a place that I would like to imagine living, of all of the different zones. The architecture is very pretty. And this is another place where we can read more donations if there are any, as Angormus paths through this vaguely Vatican-looking city.
There is one point of interest I'm still interested in picking up in this zone. It's a bell. It's going to be coming up on the left here. It drops you 3 exalted orbs to finish out your pieces of gear quite nicely.
No ordinary bell.
Yeah, so exalted orbs are an interesting currency. Just to reiterate for players who may be unfamiliar, or for viewers who may not play Path of Exile, items start with a color-coded item rarity based on the number of modifiers on the item, sometimes called affixes. What those affixes are, they can be things like additional max life, additional damage of various different types, additional resistances, armor, the ability to leech life on hit or mana on hit, or Angormus's favorite modifier, thorns. What Angormus is choosing to do there is to get exalted orbs, which allow him to sort of polish off the end of an item. If an item has at least 3 modifiers already, it is called rare. It is a yellow item. And these exalted orbs allow him to sort of top up already good pieces of gear. Different item types, meaning rings versus gloves versus weapons versus shields, for example, have different lists of possible modifiers. So depending on whether he feels he needs more offense or more defense or more utility, he'll choose to spend those exalted orbs on different items to fish for modifiers that may be useful in terms of offense or defense or utility.
I can't yet.
Now we are fighting Torvion, Hand of the Savior. Torvion is buffed from the Bleachers, sort of the 12th man effect, if you will. You can see he has these priests casting important offensive and defensive buffs on him. Fortunately for us, Torvion is not very smart, and he picks up boulders to throw at us, and we can kite him into throwing those boulders at his fanboys. This is the Fanboy Friday segment of the run.
His 3 buffs go away when we enter the second phase of the fight, when he reaches low HP, and they cast the beam instead.
The beam, very threatening for at least 3 reasons. 1, it does a lot of damage, but 2, it also completely blocks your ability to see anything, and 3, it destroys your frames per second. So very important skill check here. You've got to have good gear, and that's not just your items in the game, but also a good graphics card for this fight.
I believe it does about 850 fire damage per second, if I remember correctly.
All this digging, what are they looking for?
And now we are on to the excavation. So, like I said, the ancient forge where we need to reforge the weapon against chaos is being uncovered by the Twilight Order in this archaeological dig site. They have a lot of little worker bees working on things, and they're pretty good at moving rocks and trying to slam us with them. There are a couple of important midway objectives in this zone. We'll be skipping all of them as we're very, very close to the end of the run. We have only 2 major boss fights left, and then there will be time.
What is interesting is that there is that shrine that I passed by earlier. I like to save it for the actual boss fight. I'll be checkpointing back to it once I hit the boss arena. And then I'll be entering the boss arena with the buff. In this case, I got an acceleration shrine, so my movement speed will be buffed, my attack speed will be buffed, my cast speed will be buffed. Thankfully.
So we've now found the ancient forge, and we're going to go ahead and grab the acceleration shrine and path back in. This is by far the most threatening boss fight in the game. This is Benedictus, Herald of the Order. He does big area of effect physical damage slams with rocks, as well as big lightning damage. Angormus does not have particularly impressive lightning damage. He does have a topaz charm equipped, so as a consequence, he will be able to mitigate at least a little bit of that. Unfortunately, his lightning damage equipment here is not particularly good, so this will be a big skill showcase for what a high-level player can do with very bad defensive utility here. You'll notice him kiting out a bunch of mechanics here, and then there are some very simple mazes to solve.
You had your chance.
That acceleration
The Savior
shrine
is pure.
definitely helping us to get out of that maze in time. And then we're going to go ahead and try and stun Benedictus before he can do his AoE rock slam.
You actually can't stun him during this, but this actually works out in my favor because the second he comes out of this, usually he'd do some sort of mechanic, instead I'll be able to stun him immediately once he's been phased. Now he won't be able to do anything else, so I'll kill him during the stun.
Now, like I mentioned, the weapon, the ancient weapon, is incredibly powerful, and all of the different factions in the game are now vying for it, including people we thought were our friends. So the chieftain of the local tribe, Tavakai, comes through to aid us and finish off Benedictus before he can run away, as well as killing the NPC who betrayed us in favor of the Twilight Order. Unfortunately, this chieftain, Tavakai, who you can see in front of us here as his character model zooms out, then betrays us in a cutscene we're about to watch. And Tavakai will end up stealing the weapon and absconding with us, and Tavakai will be the final boss of the act.
The ones that came before, older than the oldest stories.
This is it. We're here.
Regal all.
You've done well.
Now we're just waiting for a character here to come and reforge the weapon for us. And While we do that, we're going to decorate the floor with a bunch of items. Keep our inventory clean.
This will take most of my strength. Stand back.
And we're going to slide our UI brightness to the maximum and make sure that we flashbang the audience. And now Tavakai the Chieftain has knocked down our companion here and stolen the weapon, and we will be on a goose hunt to finish the run here.
What? No, daughter! I will fix this. The Karui way!
I'm going to steal a comment from Twitch chat just now and refer to him as Tavakai the Thieftain. The Tavakai the Thieftain of the local tribe.
Just have to talk to the hooded one, and then we have to talk to the new ship captain, since Makoru is stolen by Tavakai, being his daughter.
And now we are in the final boss rush of the area. We have to clear 2 zones, Ingakanu and then eventually the heart of the tribe. As we go through here, these zones are pretty easy to read, so it won't be an area where I need to give Angormus time to focus. But one thing that it is important is that Angormus may end up in a situation where he's now at the maximum amount of underleveled he can be. He's level 31, fighting level 53 enemies. It's a particularly threatening zone if he gets knocked down. He goes through this series of log houses, and based on the orientation of that entry log house, he can then predict where the exit to the zone will be. He also can do a little bit of leap slam abuse to get through the zone. You'll notice that he's choosing to take on and off his shield to balance his mobility against his survivability. In a race setting, there's actually a penalty for dying imposed within the video game itself by the developers, called rigor mortis, where depending on the exact balancing, you usually have a penalty of around 1 or 2 minutes when you die or get knocked down. In this upcoming race cycle, it's actually tuned way up to 2.5 minutes per death. So dying in this zone could be the difference between winning and losing a race in a close competition. We have beelined our way into the heart of the tribe, and we are now running all the way through to get to the final boss arena. It's a 3-phase boss. I'll be narrating each phase separately, but we need to get Angormus through this next zone, the heart of the tribe, level 53 zone. Based on the position of that checkpoint and waypoint that we just passed, you can tell exactly what map you are in. There are some micro variations that can add fences in places that matter, but for the main idea, Angormus is going to be able to beeline all the way to our boss arena, which is a log house at the end of this zone here. In the first phase of this final boss fight, Tavakai does exclusively fire and physical damage, so Angormus has already weapon swapped to the maximum amount of fire resistance that his gear will allow him to have. And that particular fight is not super difficult in Zone 1. There is one giant slam attack that could be a one-shot, but it has a very easy to dodge telegraph, and then phases 2 and 3 are much more threatening.
I believe with the typical level of gear, including on this run, I can just tank it, so long my guard is up. For the most part, I've been able to tank it all my runs.
You don't belong here.
So we are now at Tavakai the Chieftain, and we will confront him. We're going to stack those shield walls on top of him, make sure that we get our totems out, and he will do almost exclusively physical damage and crowd control effects to us. We throw down as much stuff as we can to break armor, and we will now be trying to kill the boss, who is very slowed at the moment, it looks like. Big stun, very important stun. When he gets to half HP, he'll go into the next phase, so we may avoid the most dangerous mechanics.
Yep.
go.
And this is with a shield that's on the very low end of the RNG for damage.
And now Tavakai, overcome by corruption, sort of hulks out with blood pustules on his shoulders and neck, regains HP, and now he has a different set of attack mechanics as we progress into this inner sanctum part of his boss arena, where he prays to a deity that their tribe worships. And then he does powerful physical slams and a little bit of mixed elemental damage in this second phase.
Twist the earth, Tafua. Outsiders exploited our
And
kindness.
this should not be particularly difficult. We get a stun off. When we get the boss to about 1/3 HP, he will transition to his third phase.
There's about the only one-shot mechanic left in this run that I'd have to worry about in this build.
Your head is mine.
He does the red channel
And-
circle.
Tokuhama.
We should see the boss go into phase here, so we kill the little additional units that he summons, and then there's some dialogue here. He prays to Tukohama, and Tukohama rebukes him, and now we will get a transition into the final boss of the game, third phase here, and time is when you see the shade, the little NPC character, descend from the ceiling, which is at the same time as the boss's HP bar disappears from the screen. So when you see Tavakai the Consumed, when you see that brass banner go away, that is officially time.
Everything for my people.
And I will let Angormus focus on the final fight of the game.
Not stand in my way.
Protection!
Bloodbath.
I need more time.
Reach burns deep, and by the morn you shall fear the
I need
name
more time.
Karui. I will give everything for my people. You will not stand in my way. Bloodbath.
I need more time.
It's a bit more difficult on a run like this where I have low resistances, but thankfully I picked up another source of life leech, so it's not that bad.
Deep and burn. What have I done?
And that is time 2:44:45. It's a pretty good time. The best possible runs are in the low 230s. The worst runs for a high-level player would be about this, so this is a good showcase of what a marathon safe run would look like. Things will vary a little bit patch to patch, so if you're on the GDQ Games Committee and you're watching this run to evaluate things, I do want to point out this will probably be submitted under a 3-hour or 3-hour 15 estimate, depending on what Angormus decides to submit. But this is a good example of sort of a mediocre case in terms of time, while still showcasing all of the important mechanics, while still explaining everything and making sure that we get a good showcase of a clean, high-level players run toward the ends of the RNG aspect. This is toward the lower end of the RNG, while still showcasing high-level strategy and execution.